Yeah, we've got quorum, so we're going to make a start. Quite a bit to get through, and allows a bit more time with the minister. We just remind people to turn off their phones. Interferes with the recording equipment, and we'll work our way through the agenda. So, first agenda item is apologies. We've received apologies from Chris Hazard and Sean Lynch. Any other apologies or no? Okay. Agenda item 2 then is the minutes held on the 21st of January. Pages 5 to 11 of your meeting folders. If you want to quickly look over that and then indicate if you're content for me to sign.
Great.
Everyone happy enough? Yeah? Okay. Matters arising. Correspondence has been received from the Human Rights Commission providing further information in relation to the amendment which is known as the Jim Wells Amendment, the Justice Bill, as a result of the oral evidence session the 3rd of December. A copy of this correspondence is pages 13 to 15 of your folder. That's just to be noted unless anybody has anything to add to it. The second item of correspondence is from the Department. They've provided further information regarding the operation of the National Crime Agency in Northern Ireland, including a paper setting out proposed accountability arrangements, which was circulated to the parties on the 8th of September. A further paper building on the initial proposals in the draft order produced by the Home Secretary to assist the discussions. The relevant papers are pages 3 to 11 of the table pack. The Department has indicated that if the matter is to be resolved, the draft order will need to be introduced in Westminster by the end of the month, given the election in May. The order will require Assembly consent. The draft order and further paper have been provided to the parties with a request for the Minister to consider it urgently. So it's just for noting at this stage, it's more of an issue for the parties, but just to make everyone aware of it. Okay, so if we move on then to agenda item 4, the Minister of Justice and officials will attend to discuss the 15-16 final Justice budget. Background papers at pages 18 through to 89 of the meeting folder, and a briefing paper which sets out the final budget allocations and the response to the issues raised by the committee in relation to the budget proposals. A summary of the results of the consultation, the savings recovery plan, and possible equality implications, which the Department provided on Monday, are at pages 26 through to 124. Additional correspondence has just been received providing an outline of the proposals. The Minister is looking to manage the legal aid pressure. The Executive considered the proposals last week and has invited the Minister to bring forward a detailed paper for formal consideration. A copy of the letter has been tabled. So, can I welcome the Minister, along with Liam Patterson and Glenn Capper, advising that the answers are here and obviously the transcript will appear in due course. So, maybe you're ready, Minister, if you want to give us the good news.
I'll give you the news, Chair. Thank you for your welcome, and I suppose I should welcome you since this is the first time you've been in the Chair on my appearance to the meeting. And thanks for the opportunity to brief the committee on the outcome of the 2015-16 final budget for the DOJ. When I came to the committee on the 1st of October to discuss the Department's finances, next year's position was still unclear. But I noted at that time that unfortunately very difficult funding and prioritisation decisions will be required that will have a major impact on the wider justice system and the services we provide, and that remains the case. To assist the committee in considering the budget outcome for the Department, I'd like to focus on the overall funding position for the DOJ in 2015-16, how the Department has prioritised the funding available, and the next steps in the process. So looking firstly at the overall funding position, the briefing pack you've received sets out the 2015-16 budget settlement. The starting point for the Department's budget is a 15.1% cut against our 2014-15 opening baseline. That cut is equivalent to £165 million. The Executive has then provided an allocation of £90 million, equivalent to 6.4%. £20 million of that was provided as part of the final budget process. In total, the PSNI will receive £65 million of the £90 million. Separately, HM Treasury is providing £29.5 million of security funding for the PSNI. This is not baseline related and is specific funding for a specific purpose. However, it's important to note that the starting point for all DOJ spending areas will be the 15.1% reduction. The balance of the Executive's £90 million that has not gone to the PSNI, i.e. £25 million, has been allocated based on our priorities. In some areas, it will be used to offset the impact of baseline cuts, and so some areas have cuts lower than 15.1%. In other areas, it has been used to offset specific demand-led pressures as far as possible. However, some areas have higher cuts so that funding can be reallocated to the frontline priorities. In terms of capital, as the briefing points out, the Department's baseline will also fall significantly by 24%, and I'll say something more about that later. Finally, the Department received £772,000 from the Executive's 2015-16 Change Fund. So let me explain how we've prioritised the funding available. The Department launched its budget consultation on the 3rd of December, and by the 29th of December closing date, received a total of 65 responses. You've received a full set of responses in a summarised version, which I hope has been useful to give some sense of the responses received. Over 40% of the responses referred to the impact of budget cuts to the Probation Board, with the other main themes being the impact on the voluntary and community sector and the legal aid pressure. I'll set out later how we've responded to the consultation responses. Each spending area was also asked to provide a savings delivery plan setting out, for example, savings measures, key risks, the impact on service delivery, and an assessment of Section 75 equality impacts. From this information, the Department prepared a draft consolidated savings delivery plan for 2015-16, which has been shared with you. I should stress, however, that this is a draft plan setting how savings against draft budget allocations would be delivered. This draft plan will be amended to become the final departmental savings delivery plan, which will reflect changes between draft and final budget. As well as ongoing engagement with all justice bodies, the information provided in the consultation responses, savings delivery plans, and the views of the committee have been an important part of the process to set final budget allocations. Your briefing pack provides a table setting out the Department's planned changes to the draft budget allocations that were consulted on and therefore final budget allocations. As you can see, the additional £20 million for the PSNI reduces their savings targets to 5.7%. This will allow the police service to take forward important but probably limited recruitment plans in 2015-16 and will avoid some of the more severe impacts on policing and public safety. I should note that this is also due to the fact that the Chief Constable has led work across the PSNI to ensure that significant savings have been generated to reduce costs. As I've said, based on the responses to our consultation and the information in savings delivery plans, the Department plans to make some amendments to other draft budget allocations. All of these are in line with the priorities of protecting frontline areas, public safety and outcomes for the public. Therefore, the Probation Board will receive an additional £500,000, reducing their cut from 12% to 9.2%. The Prison Service will receive an additional £300,000, reducing their cut from 8.7% to 8.4%. And the Courts and Tribunal Service will receive an additional £500,000, reducing their cut from 12% to 10.8%. Both the Probation Board and Prison Service have also received funding from the Change Fund. Probation allocation of £472,000 will allow an intensive resettlement and rehabilitation project to be taken forward. The Prison Service allocation of £300,000 will go towards the project for underachieving boys to support young offenders to change their lives through education. Your briefing pack notes that Compensation Services budget will reduce by £950,000. This reflects the fact that forecasting Compensation Services annual requirements with certainty is inherently difficult, and there is therefore potential for funding to be released from the Compensation Services budget in 2015-16. This will be closely monitored throughout the financial year to ensure that the impact is minimised. The committee has also asked about funding for the Railway Street Addiction Service in Ballymena. As I've said, the extremely challenging financial position faced by my department requires difficult funding and prioritisation decisions to be made. While my aim has been to try to protect frontline justice services and limit the public safety consequences, given the scale of cuts required, this has not always been achievable. Following my department's original announcement to cease funding on the 31st of January this year, further funding was secured from savings elsewhere in the department and from the Assets Recovery Community Scheme to allow the Northern Trust to keep the project operating until March 2015. I and my officials have held a number of meetings with senior Trust staff. Most recently, the Director for Safer Communities met with Trust officials on the 23rd of January with an offer of £50,000 to £60,000 for the 2015-16 period to contribute to the Justice Partnership aspect of the service. Trust officials are now considering this offer. I fully recognise the importance of this type of intervention and prevention work delivered by Railway Street. However, the financial position means that difficult choices will have to be made on the basis of affordability. I think that it is important to state that the reduction of the DOJ portion of the funding does not mean the end of a community addiction service in Ballymena. I'm also aware of the committee's concerns in relation to search and rescue funding in 2015-16. I recently met with some of the voluntary search and rescue organisations, and I'm mindful of the important and valuable work which they undertake. No decision has yet been taken on this funding. The DOJ has taken over responsibility for this from DECAL, and organisations have been asked to make their bids for funding by the 30th of January. I wrote to the DECAL Minister regarding the transfer of funding, and my officials are still in negotiations with DECAL over the amount of funding which will transfer. Therefore, the search and rescue budget for 2015-16 is still in the process of being finalised, and I will keep the committee updated. A key risk to the department living within its available funding next year is the legal aid budget. I've already introduced a number of reforms to reduce the level of spend. These are focused mainly on fees and on more appropriate levels of representation at various court tiers. These reforms have already reduced costs by some £22 million, but the full impact has been obscured by an increase in disposals at the Crown Court. While the outcome at the Crown Court is welcome in terms of reductions in delay, the increase in disposals has maintained this pressure on the budget. I will implement further reforms to criminal fees shortly, and I will be introducing new civil fees in phases from the 1st of April. You will also be aware that I've commissioned the Access to Justice Review Part 2, which is intended to inform a radical restructuring of the existing arrangements by considering the minimum level of support required to meet human rights obligations and protect the most vulnerable in society. This will help to shape the agenda for the next mandate. However, even with a significant programme of reform and cuts, the demand for legal aid has consistently exceeded the available budget. For example, spend on civil legal aid has increased by 20% since 2010-11. This creates a pressure on my department, which, now that the ring fence has been lifted, creates a pressure on the executive budget. This will continue to be the case next year. The legal aid baseline of £75 million is subject to 15.1% cuts, a cut of approximately £11 million, which reduces baseline funding to £64 million. This will simply increase the legal aid pressure, which, based on current forecasts, is around £21 million in 2015-16. I'm therefore developing a range of urgent measures with a view to closing the gap and living within the funding available as far as possible. I'm seeking the executive support, and in due course will be seeking the committee support to take these forward. I propose a range of measures for managing the legal aid pressure. Some of these will reduce the scope of legal aid and deliver savings over a period of time. Following discussions, the executive has asked me to bring forward a detailed paper for formal consideration. The areas of legal aid that will be affected by the proposals include money damages claims, with the exception of serious clinical negligence cases and cases which arise from the actions of state agencies, private family law, ancillary relief, and means testing. In addition, I've outlined a proposal for a short-term exceptional measure to help to manage the pressures on an in-year basis. This would involve a strictly controlled levy on bills to be paid based on the amount required to live within budget. The levy would be exceptional in nature and only intended to be deployed while more permanent arrangements are made to reduce the demand for and the cost of legal aid. These measures will be informed by the outcome from the Access to Justice Review Part 2. In relation to legacy issues, the outworking of the Stormont House Agreement will be vital to the DOJ, and it will be important that agreement is reached as soon as possible on the bodies to be funded. Without this, there will be unmanageable legacy-related costs facing the DOJ in 2015-16 and beyond. Moving then to capital, I mentioned that our budget will fall by 24%. The information you've received sets out how we plan to allocate the budget of £42 million together with the impacts. A significant element of our capital plans for the next few years is the redevelopment of the prison estate. Whilst NIP's capital allocation will allow some work to be taken forward next year, we will not be able to progress plans, and nor should we, without having secured longer-term funding. Therefore, I plan to seek the executive support for this programme of work. The committee will no doubt be keen to understand the impact of the budget on the Community Safety College at Desert Creek. The information you've received sets out the current position. You will note that an allocation of up to £53 million has been provided in 2015-16 for this project, and that this is dependent on agreeing the drawdown of unspent funds from the Treasury in 2015-16. Discussions on this issue continue between Treasury and DFP. Budget cuts will impact on staff numbers, as the Savings Delivery Plan shows. Significant reductions have already been delivered, as, for example, vacant posts have not been filled. In relation to the planned voluntary exit scheme, the Department has captured updated information this week, and this shows that a total of 195 staff from the core department and agencies will be required to leave under the scheme in 2015-16 to live within budget allocations. For our NDPPs, the figure is 171. There are obvious risks attached to this if the forecast numbers of staff do not leave. Also, the Department will need to consider the associated impact on staff numbers when considering the functions we undertake in the future. Finally, I would like to say something about the next steps. I've outlined the planned changes to draft budgets. The Department now plans to write to each spending area, providing details of their final budget. Spending areas will be asked to prepare a final savings delivery plan, taking into account revised funding and any other changes since their draft plan was prepared. Final budget allocations will reduce impacts on the front line, service delivery and equality as far as possible. Therefore, the spending areas that have highlighted these issues will now consider the impacts based on a lower budget cut and will amend their savings delivery plan and update the Section 75 equality impact assessment accordingly. The Department will then prepare a final consolidated departmental savings delivery plan. We will consider the implications of this, share it with the committee as soon as possible, and report against this during 2015-16 in line with DFP guidance. To conclude, I hope this provides the committee with a useful overview of the final budget plans. As I said at the outset, very difficult funding and prioritisation decisions have been required that will have a major impact on the wider justice system and on the services that we provide. Living within the budget settlement will be very difficult. Without major reductions in legal aid expenditure, it will be impossible. It has not been possible to fund everything that the Department would otherwise have wanted to, but we have sought to protect frontline services, public safety and outcomes for the public as far as possible within a reduced funding envelope. Chair, we're now happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. The legal aid issue is something that I'm quite sure members will want to explore, and I'll come to that in a second. It's already received considerable attention in the media today, as I'm sure you're aware. Just to kick off, though, obviously policing is the bulk of spend within DOJ, 7 times greater than the next area of spending. So therefore, you would imagine it's the area in which you could find the greatest level of efficiencies. Can you give us an indication of the level of sight you're given to how police are spending their budget and whether they're working alongside the department in terms of trying to find efficiencies, or whether there's greater use of shared services or ways in which you can save money within their budget?
I think in a sense you've highlighted it, Chair. Their operational independence means that the Department is not fully involved within that work. But obviously, at more than an informal level, we have been discussing the potential impacts with the Chief Constable and his senior team. I know, for example, that all spending areas within the PSNI have been subject to very close scrutiny by the senior team as they look at their prioritisation and as they seek to ensure that they manage the budget as best they can. They've shared something of that information with us, but at the end of the day, operational decisions for the Chief Constable have to be decisions for the Chief Constable, which is why, for example, when I referred to the potential they now have for some increased recruitment, I said it was likely to be limited, but the final decision will not be mine. It will be the Chief Constable's. We do also have to recognise the role of the Policing Board that they have in terms of oversight for the police as well.
And do you think there's any scope for more of that working together? I appreciate the Chief Constable is the accounting officer for the police, but clearly when so much of the budget is going towards policing, is there any willingness from the police to work with the officials within the department or even within officials from DFP to try to see if there are areas in which there could be common interests or shared services? Or
Glenn's probably in a better place to answer the technicalities of that.
Yes, I think the answer to that is yes. If I use an example close to home, police are in the process of considering a new finance system, which will naturally fit with the DFP shared service model. So they have engaged with us and therefore with DFP to explore what the options are. So they're very open to it. It's worth noting, however, that there are some restrictions around the security of information, for example. So yes, police are open to explore those options with a view to generating as much efficiency as possible, albeit with that caveat.
Minister, you also mentioned the prison service funding, the extra 300,000 and the allocation through the change fund. You'll be aware from questions yesterday that a number of concerns were raised about, particularly in Maghaberry, around staffing levels and the use of overtime and the number of times that the prison's been locked down because of staff shortages. In your view, is there enough funding going to the prison service to ensure that they can maintain levels of safety for prison officers and for prisoners? And is there any flexibility within your budget to allocate additional funding to the prison service should that be necessary?
The reality is that at the present time there is a very limited amount of money held back at the centre to look to emerging pressures during next year. Clearly the issue of safety for prison staff, for prisoners and for visitors is a key matter. And there's no doubt that after a period in which we saw significant progress in reducing the number of lockdowns, Maghaberry, as opposed to the other two institutions, has seen an increase in the last couple of months. I mean, that is the blunt reality of what happens with the budget we've got. There'll be issues as we look at staffing arrangements and see, frankly, how you manage the expenditure between overtime and additional staffing, which need to be looked at. But it's not something which an easy guarantee can be given. I did also highlight yesterday that much of the issue about particularly prisoner assaults seems to be related to overcrowding. And by bringing one of the square houses back into use, we have reduced levels of overcrowding and we have seen some progress on that front. But it is the kind of issue which requires constant attention by prison service management, both centrally and at institution level.
Okay. Just on a very brief question on the Stormont House agreement, you mentioned the voluntary exit scheme requiring 195 staff from the department, 171 from non-departmental public bodies. When would you anticipate you will know whether or not staff members have come forward to volunteer to exit the civil service?
I think the reality in that is we will not know for sure until the full details are published by DFP and individuals make the bid, to formally seek their opportunity to go. I know when we ran the very similar voluntary exit scheme for prison officers, it was literally not possible to know until the last day examining how many were likely to. Certainly the head of the civil service would say that when the scheme is announced, a very large number of people will inquire what the terms are. That doesn't mean that a very large number of people will eventually make the formal application. So it's very difficult to know, and like other departments, we would have to wait and see how that goes.
And are there any anticipated costs to the department flowing from the agreement?
Around staffing matters, no.
Not around staffing matters, around any of the other issues.
The key challenge will be to look at the various institutions dealing with the past, in particular the HIU, and see how speedily the current work which is being done around the past within the police ombudsman's office, within legacy inquests, can be covered in effect by the additional allocation from HM Treasury to deal with that. And there are challenges because we're not quite sure of the terms on which that money is to be offered as to exactly what the 5 years are. And that again is an issue being discussed by DFP. But certainly there are very significant issues on the past which currently fall to DOJ, where we will be, at the request of the executive of the 5 parties, DOJ is doing work with the NIO around the necessary legislation, but we do need to see those institutions in place as soon as possible so that we can then see an appropriate way of managing the past without impacting on the budget for the present.
And just finally, in terms of the legal aid issue, you'd mentioned about the exceptional measures that were required, and the letter that has been supplied to the committee today, it mentions involving a strictly controlled levy on bills to be paid based on the amount required to live within budget. Could you perhaps give us a little bit more information about what that levy actually means, or what sort of level that levy would be on?
Well, at present, there's a scheme, the statutory discount, which allows up to 10% to be deducted from certain fees, mostly as I understand it in the civil area. It's intended to reflect the concept that if the state is paying solicitors or barristers, they're more likely to get their money than if a private client is funding them. The legal provision on that is up to 10%. The current level is 5% is being deducted from that. In a very similar way, the intention would be to apply a further levy at the point when bills are paid across the range of legal aided services, the rate at which the discount would be taken would depend upon the difference between the forecast legal aid expenditure and the budget for any 1 year, would be time limited, would require Assembly approval every year, would be for a maximum of 15% discount, and if it was less than 5%, was seen as the gap would not apply at all. So on a variable basis, it could be between 5% and 15% based on the forecast which is put forward at the beginning of the financial year, subject to Assembly approval every year.
And is there any legal difficulty with a retrospective policy such as that? I mean, I suppose if you're doing the 5%, if you were extending that to 15%, is there any potential for a legal challenge on the basis that it's retrospective?
My understanding is not subject to the primary legislation being drafted in the correct way, but that is clearly something where the policy intent has to go to executive, and we would hope that that would be fairly soon, and then after consultation period on the process, appropriate legislation would have to be put forward.
And obviously today we've heard from a number of people in the legal profession with concerns around some of the proposals. Have you had any discussions with the Bar Council or the Law Society around these proposals yet?
I had a brief and preliminary discussion with the President of the Law Society and the Chair of the Bar Council and the senior officer of each of the two organisations. Four of them came in to see me on Monday afternoon, explained to them the work that I had been asked to do by the Executive last Thursday when I presented a broad outline of these proposals and asked them to maintain confidence until the committee had been informed. But I felt that given that they were the people who were involved, it was appropriate to inform them at that senior level.
And obviously you're to work up the details of these proposals for the Executive, but in terms of your thinking at the moment, would the levy be applied on a universal basis, or would it be for particular cases or particular firms who are earning more than a particular threshold in any given time?
No, it would have to be on a universal basis, you know, to be equally fair or possibly equally unfair as might be represented.
Okay, Chair, thank you. I thank the Minister for attending the committee today on this very important and serious issue, the budget. And can I just say I also appreciate the difficult environment we're in and the austere times that we are living through. And again, with that comes the responsibility and the added difficulty in trying to manage budgets. And again, whilst you have a massive budget, if I could maybe delve into the minutiae, I'm sure, Minister, you know what I'm going to talk about, a couple of issues that really impact on people's lives, the most vulnerable within our society, and that is the Railway Street drug service. You had said in your opening statement that you had found 50 to 60,000 for the next financial year, and that the health the officials are assessing that at the present time. But can I ask then, out of your departmental briefing paper dated the 27th of January, which we received in our additional papers, you must have applied to DFP for the Change Fund, 15-16, and within that one of the proposals was for £380,000 of resource. And I'm just wondering, was that unsuccessful, if that's the right terminology, or is that still awaiting confirmation from the DFP, or how does that work with regards to the Change Fund?
I outlined the two successful bids. My understanding is that they are the only successful bids we received this year. The Railway Street bid was not met. Right, okay. So sorry, not only not met, but will not be met. Not
right, okay. Thank you very much for that confirmation. When you look at this service and the service that it does provide to our most vulnerable, and it is very intense support, and it's bringing people who have a dependency on drugs and alcohol, and their world is in chaos, and with that then comes chaotic behaviour which affects their family and their wider environment and their society around them. And it really did take this service to bring people back into being able to manage their chaos. And it has worked extremely well. And if you contrast that service, which costs £380,000, and when you contrast that to the millions that is being pumped into legal aid, or I know it's a different aspect of your budget, but then also the millions been pumped into what is basically a failed concept in the PCSPs, which provide services that could well be merged into a council setting. When we cannot find £380,000 for this service on Railway Street, which then will have a massive effect on people going to prison and the levels of crime in the localities, and the resource and the burden that will place on our police service, is there no way, Minister, that we can find more money for this service? Because whilst you have found 50 or 60,000 for the next financial year, that is in effect an 87% cut to that service. And there will be an economy of scale whereby it just will not be able to effectively deal and support with these vulnerable people. And whilst the health people will be looking at this, I can see that they'll be totally distraught, and they'll have to, as I've spoken to them last week, they're going to have to peg back most, if not all, of their services for which they provide now. And it's going to have a tremendous effect on not only society, but also the other service providers that seek funding from your department, which, in my eyes, if we were looking at this in austere times and we were looking to invent some model that would actually save money, these are the sort of projects that would save money. And if we have a bath that's overflowing with austerity and you're paying for more buckets to dish the water out of the bath, you have done absolutely nothing to turn the tap off. In fact, by reducing the service, you've actually turned the tap on. And invest to save, all these statements that civil service like to use, they are completely out the window when we are talking about a service here that supports the vulnerable, which then supports society. So is there no way, Minister, that we can find the funding to keep this service running and, in my opinion, and I would argue the case, to enhance it in order to save money?
Let me just start before I come to the nub of your point in responding to your comment on PCSPs, because the report we saw recently from Sijini showed that there are problems with some PCSPs. There are others which are extremely successful. So suggesting it's a failed concept is not something I recognise. But on the key point you make, I spent this morning with two of our NGO partners, seeing good work they're doing rehabilitating people. In some cases, prisoners going out on day release, and others those who have moved out of custody. That is another area where, bluntly, on the money we have got, we may not be able to continue to provide the same level of support. That is the practicality of the world we live in. Probation Service has laid off temporary staff. Youth Justice Agency is looking at how they can continue to meet their responsibilities in the community. Prisons are having to cut back across a range of rehabilitation work. Police officers will be significantly fewer in number over the next financial year than the number that was designed a couple of years ago in a detailed examination of the numbers who are required. That is the world we live in. I would love to be able to support projects like Railway Street to the level it's been happening. That's why we literally scraped the barrel to see what could be done to maintain a level of funding. But it just is not possible on all we currently face to continue to fund some extremely valuable and worthwhile projects. That's the reality of the budget that we have to live with.
But are you completely assured, Minister, that when your advisors and the civil service around you tell you that these services have to be cut, that it isn't simply a service that's being cut because, quite frankly, it's a joint venture between yourselves and health, and it's an easy thing to cut? There'll be less pain than trying to tackle some of the bigger monsters within your department. And
Are you completely sure that it hasn't been a salami slice cut and that everything has been explored and the business cases that suggest to me that this will actually save money and take the burden off some of the bigger monsters within your department, namely the PSNI, the budget monsters, of course, the PSNI and legal aid, that this will actually, on the far side of austerity, this will have actually shown to have saved money? Are you completely convinced that all of that has been thrashed out and that this simply isn't civil service taking the easy way out?
Well, you've taken me back to when we set the budget for the 4-year CSR period that's just coming to an end, when you refer to salami slicing. Because at that stage, it was made clear in the DOJ the priority was protection of frontline services. And I remember reading a comment on social media when we published our spending plan. There's somebody saying that Ford was protecting his own because the biggest cuts were in justice delivery rather than where the real work was being done. That person was completely unaware that justice delivery is a euphemism for all our back office services, which have taken the biggest hit every year for 4 years and will continue to take a colossal hit next year. But that is the reality of what we're living with. We have a very small core departmental budget. Our budget is overwhelmingly going to frontline services, either by spending areas of the department or by various arm's length bodies and NDPBs. That is what we've done, that is what we continue to do. But the reality is, with a difficult budget settlement for 4 years in a row, because of the way we were ring-fenced to spending in England and Wales, we have actually managed that to protect the front line, but can protect the front line no longer in next year. That is the blunt truth. I wish we could continue to fund a range of positive frontline work. We simply can't.
Minister, if I could take you then to another aspect, because I know that for the specialised service that Railway Street is, there's nothing really you can do other than fund it. But there are community and voluntary groups like the North West Mountain Rescue Team and the Foyle Rescue Unit and Mountain Mourns and Fermanagh Rescue. Now these, as you'll know, they don't simply just climb mountains and save people. They look for vulnerable people all throughout and are called out on many occasions by the PSNI themselves, who, whilst they would have people who would be trained in this sort of specialism, they do not have the capacity to call them out because they're already maybe working on other frontline policing issues. And I know that there's you said in your opening statement that you haven't that resolved yet, and there's a funding pot, as I believe, is for 40,000 to cover the 7 voluntary groups, the rescue groups. But there must be other means and other ways whereby you can actually help and assist these groups other than just part fund them. And I'm talking about things like they all have vehicles, and the North West Mountain Rescue, I think, have 3 vehicles at the present time, maybe 4. But they need to be fuelled, and they're fuelled out of the pockets of the volunteers, and they need to be serviced, and they need to be serviced by money out of the volunteers' pockets. Is there any way that, whilst we need funding for these groups, that they can be brought into an in-house? Let's take, for instance, the mechanic workshop that the PSNI would have. Is there any way that these vehicles for these 7 groups could be put onto that conveyor belt of servicing, so that that will reduce costs and other burdens for these groups, so that you're not simply funding them or reducing their funding, but you're actually supporting them in other ways, and even maybe a fuel allowance out of the PSNI, just something else other than just hard cash from your budget line?
Well, if you're talking about putting fuel in vehicles, you are talking about hard cash. Let's be blunt about it. I mean, it's hard cash coming from somewhere. I mean, certainly, the issue of search and rescue is complex, in part because the transfer of responsibility from DCAL to DOJ has not yet been followed by the transfer of funding. But because we were assuming responsibility for coordination around search and rescue, over the last year or so, I've met a number of the groups separately on their own patches, and I met nearly all of them just 10 days ago when I was down in Enniskillen to see the current operation to recover the body of Kieran McAree. So, shall we say, at least one of them took the opportunity to bend my ear about finances on that particular afternoon. I mean, I'm fully aware of the work they do. I'm fully aware of the need to support them. I mean, there have been some other practical issues where we've looked at, like blue lights on vehicles. You know, that kind of thing is something which has given them a degree of assistance. But money has not yet been fully transferred from DCAL, and there are issues about only some of the groups were previously funded by DCAL and how we work towards it. The current position is that we are seeking bids for the next financial year by the end of this month. One of the groups said they didn't get the correspondence, so they've been given a week's extension. We will see what bids come in, see how they match together. I mean, there may just possibly be something in your idea of assistance for servicing vehicles or something like that, but that would depend upon spare capacity, which would result in reduced costs if we were to look to somewhere like the PSNI. So whether that is a runner at all, I have no idea, but frankly, anything beyond that really is hard cash. The only question is who provides the hard cash.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Raymond?
Thank you very much. Just a number of points, and thank you very much for the presentation. I mean, obviously the legal aid stuff is something which is just not, I mean, it's a broad outline, and I assume you'll be coming back to committee with the broader
Indeed,
aspects.
the detail is worked up,
Yeah,
it'll come to you.
It's just in terms of, I mean, and you spoke about the work of probation and the Youth Justice Agency, and in the paper presented, it's obvious that they are now going to lose staff. In terms of impact, when the budgets are being reallocated, what sort of relationship is there between all the agencies when we're imposing these type of cuts? Do they get any opportunity to present, what they say, probation and Youth Justice Agency, what strain that will put on the police service eventually if there are gaps in their service or indeed on the prison service?
Well, I mean, they get the opportunity to make their case, and indeed, when we went through the first round of this, I met all our spending areas, whether internal or arm's length, as one group, to explain to them the position we were in, because I didn't want people thinking that they were being told different stories, from different parts of the department. So it was an attempt to do that, and certainly we've already highlighted the issue of shared services involving the police. My discussion with some of our NGO partners has also been about joint planning and how we look at things in that kind of fully participative way. So I do think we have some very positive ideas as to how we manage the difficult circumstance, but it doesn't really make it that much less difficult. It just shows that we have a genuine partnership with those we're seeking to work with, whether they're arm's length or fully independent.
Yeah, but would part of the discussion, would there be an acceptance that with what's proposed now in terms of probation, I'll just take those two as an example, probation and the Youth Justice Agency, that more people will end up in the criminal justice system or go to prison than would be as it is currently under the current procedures? Would that be accepted?
Well, we would certainly hope not, but there is inevitability that supervision levels by probation for more minor offenders will be cut. But I mean, a lot of what they have been doing has been around rationalisation, for example, on premises. Now, that in effect can have a knock-on. I mean, probation used to have a reporting centre beside my constituency office, which is no longer there. People have to go 2 miles down the Antrim Road, to the full office. So there are ways in which those effects could be mitigated, but there will nonetheless be effects.
Yeah,
that's the blunt reality where we are.
No, I accept the reality, but the sort of case I'm trying to make, perhaps not very well, is that if the police service accept that there will be a greater risk for crime if probation and Youth Justice Agency isn't operating in a particular area, there's a part of it where they might feel that there might be parts of their budget that they could say, well, it would be better we looked at giving some money to that to ensure that we don't put a strain on. It's going to cost us more somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me to tell agencies how to cooperate, but there certainly is a general encouragement to do that.
Yeah.
And for example, I mean, the issue of the work the probation does in providing the prison welfare service is a key issue as to how that is managed between prisons and probation.
No,
so I mean, your point is absolutely valid, but I'm not sure I'm on the on the technicalities of any of it.
No, I accept that, but I'm just talking about it as a general principle that someone would look at a budget and say, if you make a cut here, then there's going to be a pressure here, and that pressure is going to cost you, in terms of your organisation. So
if you don't,
Certainly, there are justice spending areas which have made that point, the effect of what you're doing will hurt us. Can we talk about it?
but as I'm saying, but who can no one then at that stage say, like obviously there's operational integrity in some of these.
Yeah, but it is an issue for the bodies concerned.
Yeah.
In my opinion, to seek to work out between themselves what the best options are. But all of this is in terms of managing difficult situations for everybody.
Yeah, but our, say like in our, I mean, I think in the House the other day you referred to it in terms of overcrowding or lockdowns in prisons, but the reconfiguration of Macabre, is that far enough down the road as envisaged by the prison review team, in your opinion? And if that was in place, would that save, staff shortages?
I certainly think there's been significant work done around free flow movement of the lower category prisoners in Macabre, which has helped on some of those staffing matters. But I highlighted also the issue of capital, where the prison service is one area that would have been looking for significant capital investment to improve the accommodation. And part of that is then having better accommodation which can be managed with smaller numbers of officers while still maintaining safety.
So the reconfiguration is contingent on that capital spend?
The reconfiguration can proceed so far, but some of the issues are the need for one new cell block, which we would wish to see built as soon as possible.
Okay, and just a final, Declan Morgan this morning made a number of public comments. Have you any comment to make on that, or have you met with the Lord Chief Justice in relation to this? Or
I've had a broad general discussion with the Lord Chief Justice about some of the issues relating to budget settlement. Yeah. I have not discussed, the current or you're about to see consultation proposals on courthouses in any detail with him, and I was a little surprised by the tone of what I've heard of his comments. The reality is this is one of those issues where it's just like every other part of the DOJ. Difficult decisions are having to be made, and the sort of proposals that we're putting forward have the potential between courts and tribunal service and prison service, including transport, to be saving in the region of £1.5 million per year. That's a very significant sum of money which we need. We're also looking at the issue as to how we use the better courts facilities that we have, in a more efficient way, rather than some of the older, less suitable premises. Now, except in the West, there is a bigger problem because we don't have the modern courthouses that we tend to have more in the East. That's a long-term capital issue, but it is an issue as to how we manage the state better to provide better facilities for those using courts, as well as the issue about not maintaining old buildings which are not particularly fit for purpose.
And as we take this forward, do you intend to meet with the courts and tribunal services?
Well, technically the Courts and Tribunal Services is doing this on my behalf, so that, in terms of meeting the Chief Justice, I have regular meetings with him, and I've no doubt this issue will feature at our next regular meeting.
But maybe one of the sort of very notable things that he said this morning was that he felt that access to justice was being compromised by these proposals. How do we address that?
Well, I do not believe that is the case, but I think that's something we feel the committee will have the role of discussing with officials and me, if you wish, as we look at the consultation and how it goes forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your presentation so far. Minister, you had written to the committee about the levy on legal aid costs. Could you maybe give us some information on that?
Well, it's a topic which I'm not in a position to give the full detail on at this stage, but the key point would be to recognise that the budget for legal aid is likely to be well short of the anticipated expenditure for the incoming year and for years immediately after that. Operating on the basis of the existing statutory discount, where up to 10% and currently 5% can be taken from legal aid payments, the anticipation was we would have a legislation which would permit us to take up to 15%, subject to working out at the start of the year the anticipated expenditure against the budget and only applying the levy to the maximums required to bridge that gap. It would have to apply to be fair across all areas equally, and it would certainly be intended to be a temporary measure, annually decided what is appropriate, while we work on bringing legal aid expenditure closer to the budget that we have for it, which has had to be reduced significantly because of the cuts in this year.
Second question, a different question, and you mentioned the probation board for Northern Ireland. You also mentioned the financial support from the Change Fund. One of the issues that was certainly raised here was that with the probation board, with their increase in workload, including managing offenders within the community, I think there's a real fear, including myself, that as a result of some of those cuts, I mean, we were trying to get an assurance that sex offenders and violent offenders would be managed within the community. So can you give us an assurance today that, I know we're talking about cost and all this, but in terms of the community safety, that those violent offenders in particular and sex offenders will be managed within the community?
Well, certainly what has been said to me by probation board is that they would focus their work on the more serious offenders, sex offenders and violent offenders. The public protection arrangements would continue as they are. The reality is there will be things like a cutback in home visits to more minor offenders. There's a removal of the number of the smaller reporting centres, simply to save the office costs associated with it. So they are really looking at how they focus their efforts on the most significant cases they manage in order to do the public protection. But as I said to Raymond, there will be inevitably an element of a knock-on, because they will not be able to do the total level of work that they were doing previously.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Edwin?
Yeah, I can sympathise with the Minister in terms of the difficult budget circumstances that you find yourself in. And, you know, I hear very clearly what you're saying, that we can make significant savings through legal aid, and that is one area that you're potentially going to focus on. What are you proposing to do? What are the thought processes that are existing in the Department of Justice to actually tackle the issue of legal aid, and the view of many people in the public that it is something which has been excessive for a long period of time?
Well, I briefly outlined some of the key points earlier on. There is a real issue about ensuring that we maintain access to justice for the most vulnerable people in society. So we're looking at issues like, for example, money damages claims, where if there is money in question, do we really need to have legal aid to pay the lawyers? Or if there is ancillary relief relating to a divorce settlement, do we need to provide legal aid if we're talking about splitting the assets of a couple? Mm-hmm. So those are the key kind of areas we're seeking to look at. There's also the issue about relatively minor matters which can somehow cost a lot, and particularly on something like child access issues following a divorce or a separation, multiple repeat applications, frequently by a legally aided ex-partner against somebody who has a modest income, which just removes them from legal aid. So there would be no intention to remove legal aid from the basics of a divorce case where it's appropriate.
And
But multiple complaints about access to the children being at 4 o'clock and not 3 o'clock. So it's like simply have to be taken out of legal aid to be realistic.
And has the legal profession been cooperating with you in terms of making an impact upon legal aid?
Well, I did hear with interest on radio this morning one solicitor saying that the Law Society and the Bar Council had been engaging with the DOJ over 4 years, and it seemed to have no impact, because certainly I think it would be the case that we could look through over a period of time in which there have been significant modifications to proposals we've made which have taken account of the concerns they've raised.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues raised recently by Mr. McGrory, the prosecutor, was that he felt that it was actually careful, I don't put words in his mouth, but that in around 25% of cases, the defence, or 20% perhaps, defence lawyers had 2 lawyers available to them, while the prosecutors had only that available to them in around 6% of cases. And normally, the established practice across many countries is that you would have 2 lawyers where you have cases of murder and rape and the really big issues. but there seemed to be still a significant number of cases in Northern Ireland where 2 lawyers was there for the defence, which wasn't actually required. And in many ways, it's actually damaging justice because the defence have a better chance of getting off as a result of having a second lawyer available to them, which is being paid for by legal aid.
I think the last figures I saw, I mean, your principal is generally right, was around 22%
Yep.
of defence cases against 6% of prosecution cases with 2 lawyers. And of course, there will be cases where there will be a single prosecutor and there may be 2 defendants. You know, so the numbers of lawyers on the defence side can multiply up. That is an issue which needs to be looked at. I mean, clearly there are issues about equality of arms. There are issues in terms of the budget, which the PPS has, which is, of course, entirely independent from the DOJ work. And I do think that is part of the area that we can look at. We have taken some reforms in terms of the number of counsel funded in particular cases, but there are clearly issues which still need some further consideration in terms of the overall costs and the equality of arms between the 2 sides.
In terms of civil legal aid, how is that actually drawn down by the lawyers? How do they go about claiming their legal aid, their expenses?
You're getting too technical for me, I'm afraid. As I understand it, they submit the bill when the work is done, but a number of civil cases would still be subject to the taxing master in determining what is appropriate.
Yes, so that's an estimate.
Well, the taxing master makes the final decision.
Yes,
You know,
but,
based-
but what is submitted to the taxi master is an estimate.
It's a
It's an
claim.
estimated cost, and the taxi master makes a
Determines-
judgment then
yes.
on it.
Yes.
I find it astonishing that in this day and age, public money is being paid out or an estimated bill being supplied by the person who's a provider. I think if we were doing that at Stormont, the media would be over it all day, every day. I just find it absolutely fascinating that lawyers who do a course of work and can go in and say, I done £20,000 worth of work there. Someone else comes in and they make an adjudication on the basis of an estimate that has been put in front of them. There's no factual detail to actually support the claims that are being made.
Well, I don't think it's entirely accurate to say there's no factual detail, and it is the job of the taxing master to assess the work that was done.
But that was how it was previously done under the criminal legal aid as well, but that was
Certainly,
changed.
the removal of the very high cost cases regulations in favour of standard fees on the criminal defence side has made a very significant difference there.
Yes. So there would be an indication that if there was a significant difference made whenever that was changed in criminal law, then there would be an opportunity to do that with the civil law as well. And there is every chance for lawyers to be putting in inflated claims. And the evidence from the criminal law changes on legal aid would indicate that that's the case. And then have those claims drawn down whilst the public are paying for, which is a wholly unsustainable position.
Well, it is the job of the taxing master, you know, as,
Yes, as was the case in the criminal law.
as a court official to make the appropriate
But whenever they have
assessments.
to draw it down in a proper way, that is
Well,
reduced.
I'm not sure if you've seen the preliminary paper that Jim Daniel wrote for the Access to Justice Review Part 2, but he has highlighted a number of areas, which will be under consideration.
And, Minister, had you proposals on the civil legal aid around about a year and a half ago to make changes at that stage?
There have been a variety of changes. I'm not sure off the top of my head I could give you full chapter and verse of of everything that has been proposed over the timescale.
And what has delayed actually introducing those proposals?
Well, one of the issues which frankly has caused a degree of delay has been discussions with the representatives of the professions, where we have sought to be open and listen, contrary to what may sometimes be alleged.
Yeah.
There have also, I must say, been occasions when papers have been before this committee for a period of time and have not been resolved as fast as we might have hoped. And I wouldn't wish to suggest that the Department of Justice has been entirely perfect in everything it has done.
Of course.
What we do need to ensure is that for the future we get a rather better joined-up system collectively.
But of course, you don't need the committee to lay a statutory rule before the Assembly. That's something ministers can do themselves.
Well, the policy in the department up to now has been to seek to work in cooperation with the committee. I'm not sure if the committee is suggesting that we should just go ahead and do what we think anyway.
And just pointing out that, if it comes to actually meeting your budget and this is an area of saving that can be made, and the committee's delaying, it is something that you can move ahead with yourself if you so desire to do and get the support of the Assembly or not. And then it's the Assembly is responsible.
I should enjoy some of our future discussions, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Minister. I think that it is important and indeed it is incumbent upon yourself to actually move ahead a pace on this issue. We can't afford any further dilly-dallying on it.
Thank you. I did get slightly worried when you talked about having some sympathy with me, whether that meant you were going to show sympathy or criticise. I appreciate your support.
It's quite kind of you to do.
Alman?
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, how can you run a court system by reducing the number of courthouses from 22 to 10, a reduction of 45% since 2013? How can you physically carry out that process of administering justice?
Well, I'm not sure that the numbers of courthouses, is an issue. The issue is the capacity of courthouses, the accessibility of courthouses. I mean, the number of courthouses isn't particularly relevant. We used to have dozens of petty sessions sat, in a variety of odd halls, a day in the month or whatever. It wasn't providing particularly good facilities. In the days of improved transport, it became what we're now seeking to do is to ensure that we have the appropriate facilities, and certainly the document that has been prepared indicates how current court sittings could be run.
Well, you're assuming that there is capacity in 10 courthouses instead of in 22. So 10 can equal 22.
I think we're actually talking about 12, not 10, but anyway.
Sorry?
But certainly the document which has been prepared sets out the schedule as to how cases could be accommodated, all of which appears to still be predicated on the presumption that courts will largely ask people to come at 10:30 in the morning, rather than, on regular occasions in magistrates' courts running into afternoons or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's the Lord Chief Justice is saying that it would be extremely difficult to run a system on that basis. And I don't think I'm misinterpreting what he's saying. But if you reach a point where there isn't sufficient capacity on a geographic spread throughout Northern Ireland, does that not compromise access to justice?
Well, if there wasn't, it would. But I don't believe that there isn't sufficient capacity.
So you think the Lord Chief Justice's comments are misplaced?
Well, I haven't read the Lord Chief Justice's comments in total. Yeah. The Lord Chief Justice clearly sees the operation of the justice system from his perspective and that of the judiciary. I am seeking to implement an extremely difficult budget settlement across the entire range of services funded by the DOJ.
I've heard what you said about that. And
well, sorry, I will keep saying it as long as I have to keep saying it, because it's the position.
Yeah, and I accept what you're saying. I have sympathy with you in relation to it. Very bad budget, and you've got a bad deal. What I'm trying to tease out is the consequences of reductions in certain sectors of the justice system, including the courts and tribunal services. And what I'm saying is that the position seems to be that there will not be sufficient capacity in order to deal with justice on an efficient and effective basis.
And the paper that was put to me showed how the existing numbers of court sittings could be scheduled within a reduced numbers of buildings.
And just also in addition, that the number of tribunals, that there's a reduction in the number of days that a tribunal can sit. And this is nothing to do with legal aid or lawyers or anything else, because most people attending tribunals are not represented by lawyers, but represented by politicians, by voluntary workers, by advice workers and so forth. But what is happening as a result of this is that people will not be able to access tribunals, and that must lead to compromising their access to justice in relation to something that's quite crucial to them, which is how are they going to live
Well, I don't think the issue is not being able to access tribunals. Access to tribunals will be on the merits of a case. The question about the timing may be a slightly different issue, but that's the kind of detail which needs to be worked through in the consultation process.
Yes, and exactly, you put your finger on it. Timing is of the essence in many of these tribunal cases, and also time is of the essence in relation to the disposal in a fair and efficient and effective way of court cases right across the spectrum, whether it's criminal or civil. And if people can't have timely access to justice, then that is justice delayed and justice denied.
And we have done significant work over the last 4 years in speeding up the justice system.
Yeah.
That's what I highlighted in terms of some of the costs of criminal legal aid. Because there have been more cases being put through the courts, we have continued with a high level of expenditure, even though the amount per case has been reduced. But if the same number of sittings can take place in a smaller number of courthouses, then I cannot see how that will lead to delay.
Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure we'll explore this at a further date. But just coming on to your proposal in relation to legal aid, there was a note, I think, attached. There was a note attached to your letter the 28th of January, and it outlined a number of proposals. One was money damages claims, the other was private family law, the other was ancillary relief, and then means testing. Now, all of those have been under discussion in relation to legal aid for quite some time, and it's been a matter of debate and so forth. But are you not exploiting a situation now where you're saying we're going to basically exclude these areas, money damage claims, private family law, ancillary relief and so forth? Are you not really exploiting the situation and saying, well, this is now my opportunity to dispose of these things once and for all? Well, I mean, you're presenting this as a sort of emergency situation with the pressure of the budget and so forth. Are you not now saying, or certainly given the impression that you're trying to dispose of these issues which have been in the public arena for some time?
Well, let's be clear, when you talk about something like private family law, I've made it clear that there would continue to be legal aid under any proposals I'll put forward for the key hearing. The issue was of multiple repeat applications around things like access.
So it's just limited to that, to repeat.
We will work out the detail of it, but it's not an intention to remove private family law in total. And
that's my misunderstanding.
Yeah, that was made very. So it may not be. If it's not clear in the paper that's supplied to the committee, I apologise. It was certainly made very clear.
Well,
the paper I presented to the executive.
It's effectively a truncated version of whatever you're proposing. I haven't. Yeah.
Well, detailed papers will be with the committee as soon as possible, across the different options. But you might say, is this, taking things out because there's a crisis? The reality is, there is a crisis. We have no option. Mm-hmm. If we're not going to seriously tackle legal aid, then I do not believe it is possible to provide a safe society in Northern Ireland on the basis of the other services that we fund.
Well, you have been tackling legal aid. You've tackled it in relation to criminal cases. You've had the 2011 regulations. You've had the further regulations passed in relation to further cuts to legal aid in the Crown Court. And that, I think that amounts to about 27%, maybe 25% cut. Previous cuts were roughly in the region of 57% cut. So I can't see how you can cut any further in relation to criminal legal aid. Would you accept that?
At this stage, until I see the details of what needs to be worked through, I can't accept anything not being possible to do. The reality is we still have a legal aid system on both sides, which is, if not the most expensive, well amongst the most expensive in the world. And I'm certainly keen to avoid, when we look at things like family law, the sort of problems which have clearly emerged recently in England and Wales. I'm concerned to ensure as we look at a range of other issues that we find appropriate ways of ensuring that people have access to justice, which does not necessarily mean publicly funded legal aid processes.
But what I'm saying to you, Minister, is this: there are ongoing discussions with the Bar Council and the Law Society in relation to family law in particular, but other aspects of civil legal aid. You're now, as it were, fast-forwarding all these things, despite the fact there are ongoing negotiations, as I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong. And hopefully those negotiations would reach an amicable conclusion where there's agreement between your department and the various representative bodies of the professions. Have you given thought to that by introducing these proposals? Have you given thought to the impact that it might have on the legal profession, where they may say, well, we've been negotiating for quite some time with the Minister and the department, and now these things are introduced, and we come to the conclusion now that we were negotiating not in good faith, that you were not negotiating in good faith.
I think anybody would have difficulty suggesting that the DOJ has not been negotiating in good faith over a lengthy period around legal aid.
Yeah.
The reality is what we have seen at times is consultations put out and the professions don't respond during the consultation period and then seek further extended discussions. That has happened on a number of occasions over the last 4 or 5 years. That simply isn't sustainable any longer. There are issues which have to be addressed because we have a very difficult budget to deal with on the 1st of April. And if we don't address legal aid, it is an impossible budget from the 1st of April.
Well, can I come to your proposal in relation to what's termed here a short-term exceptional measure? First of all, and you call it a strictly controlled levy on bills. Well, what does short-term mean?
Potentially for the period until the end of the next Assembly mandate, but on the basis that it would be an annual renewal in any circumstances.
So this be for, what, 5 years?
Well, but
At least 5 years, probably 6 years.
potentially closer to 6 years if we're talking about the end of the next Assembly mandate.
It's hard to
That would be
regard
late.
that as short-term, would you, Minister?
I think in the great scheme of things, when you look at how long legal aid has operated, it's fairly short-term to me.
Yeah. Now, how would this work? You are actually going to deduct monies from bills, legal aid bills that are presented to the Legal Services Agency.
At the point when the agency is making payments, there will be a deduction of whatever the appropriate percentage is to live within budget to a maximum of 15%.
Yes, and so that's at least 5% in excess of anything that you could legally do.
Sorry?
That's
Well, sorry, if we take primary legislation, then
Yeah.
we could legally do it.
up to 15%.
If we take primary legislation, yes.
Oh, no, right, so you're going to introduce new legislation to do this?
Yes.
So can you...
Sorry, are you suggesting we were planning to do something illegal?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just trying to find out how you're going to do this. But so you're saying to any solicitor or any barrister, you've done your work, and you've done that work two years ago, X pounds. However, we're now going to reduce that by 15%.
In just the same way as the current discount arrangements apply to 5% and could apply to 10% under existing legislation.
So, well, that's what I'm saying. It's at least an additional 5% on top of anything that you could do.
No, because I made it clear it would only be the maximum 15% if that was required to close the gap.
But it's an extraordinary power, isn't it?
Well, it's based on the precedent that already exists.
There seems to be an exceptionally unfair thing to retrospectively deduct money from people.
But then it's been
having carried out a service, provided, gone through the whole process of verifying their bills, etc., and you then say, by the way, we'll knock off 15% of your income.
Well, then it's been exceptionally unfair since the statutory discount was introduced.
But you're exceeding anything that is current now. That's the point I'm making.
Potentially exceeding in the amount, but not varying the principle.
And does that take into account the fact that people have already paid tax on the amounts that have been claimed?
Have people paid tax on the amounts that have been?
You pay tax if you mark your if you mark a fee, you have to pay tax on that in your tax return. You must put that down, and you then pay tax on that. Whether you actually get the money in or not, you're paying tax on that, income tax. So it seems to me to be exceptionally unfair in the circumstances.
Well, I've no doubt that lawyers, accountants will be able to make appropriate.
No, you can't. You can't do that. You have to pay the tax as you mark your fee. You have to pay your tax on it within the current financial year, and it's only the point I'm making is that is money already earned, already taxed, and then you're saying, by the way, we'll apply a 15% deduction to that. I don't see that as being fair at all.
And how does it work in the context of the existing statutory discount?
Well, the detail of that I will leave to your people to advise, but in current circumstances you're paying tax and in that financial year. And I think it's very unfair then to turn around and say, by the way, you're going to pay an additional 15%. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Just to clarify on that point, Minister, so if there was to be an agreement that you would have the up to 15% ability to deduce up to the 15%, you're saying the Assembly on an annual basis would have to agree to that?
Would have to agree.
And would the Assembly be striking the rate then, or the percentage discount for that?
Yes. The DOJ, on the basis of expected expenditure versus budget, would have to estimate the shortfall and therefore the percentage, and the Assembly would have to approve that on an annual basis.
So presumably,
that's the way we're currently looking at it.
Okay, so you could, for example, you could have 5% over 2 years, and perhaps you would push that up towards a higher percentage for the year 3 or year 4.
It's perhaps more likely that we'll be talking about a higher percentage at the beginning, reducing.
Yeah, that's okay. That's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. And I've raised this before, Minister, and it's around the issue of legal aid. If someone has availed of legal aid and they receive, well, a considerable amount of compensation as a consequence of that, but they've availed of that compensation based on public funds being used to get that compensation, whatever that may be for, certainly in those cases, I think whether it's for the courts to recommend that the monies from public funds be returned in part or in whole, I would suggest that there is some room for certainly discussion around that issue. It's something that has taxed me, and I've had constituents come to me in circumstances where cases have been taken against them. One case I can think of over a land issue. The person taking the case availed of legal aid, and this person was having to fork into their own pockets to defend the case, the action against them. Certainly, if, say in that case with contention over land, if the issue was won by the person availing of legal aid, and that person then potentially went on to sell, as it was in this case, a site, I think whether it's a matter for the courts, whether it's a matter for legislation, but I think there has to be some consideration given to that particular issue. But then to move on to other issues, please, Minister. The Desert Crate project, the steering group seems to have gone excessively quiet, and I think at one stage, probably around about October, that they were to be back to us with some recommendations and findings around what might happen at the Desert Crate project and at the scene. And likewise, Mr. Capper was here in December, and we were to hear back a note in the letter that you have here that ongoing discussions are taking place between DFP and HM Treasury on access to the underspends and the likes of that. So is there any more detail around one or both of those?
But certainly the issue of the underspend is, as I understand it, still in negotiation
Still
between
ongoing.
DFP and Treasury. I don't think we've got anything more on that. Diana, are you in a position to
Yes.
update on Desert Creek generally?
In terms of the update on where the stage 2 review is, the steering group met last week and we took an interim brief at that stage in terms of how the work was progressing, and we're due to meet again at the end of February, at which stage it's projected that the programme board will bring its findings and recommendations at that stage to the steering group. That was the timeline, was the end of February. And the plan is then that very soon after that we would be in a position as a steering group to give advice to the Minister and presumably communicate more widely at that stage.
But conscious by the time the steering group even gets round to reporting back that you're going to be passed and into another spend period with the Westminster monies. So it wouldn't look too healthy or too good for Westminster if they're saying, well, what are you doing over there? Oh, what's the steering group thinking about it? You know, I would suggest to the Minister that it would be appropriate that something a bit more tangible be in place to make a more robust case, certainly to the Department, the Treasury, that in fact there was something there to spend money on. I know if you're sitting over the other side and saying, well, I've set up a steering group here to look at it, and the steering group's still meeting, and
Well, I
Wasn't
certainly
it
haven't
strong
had any
cases?
suggestions back from DFP that there's any problem raised by Treasury around that. And it is just the standard rule that any negotiations with the Treasury are done by DFP on behalf of any.
I appreciate that, but you can also appreciate the case that I'm making. If you were sitting at the Treasury and you were saying,
I appreciate your point. I mean, we'll just follow up with DFP that there's
Thank
nothing
you.
further that we should be doing.
thank you, then on the issue of, Paul had raised it there, Railway Street. I don't know how you've had sight of it or your officials have sight of it, but last week I presented to the committee correspondence from Miss Tasker, who is a pharmacist and has helped some of the people around that. And if I could maybe just, it's in the same vein as that, where you're spending money there, but you're spending money to save money, because the money that's spent, sure, you've heard the arguments, but it is very real, and she outlined that in considerable detail in her letter. The money that's been spent there is keeping people out of institutional care, be that medical or mental health or other issues, people who have addiction problems, and Paul has made the case as well there to you. Certainly I would appreciate if you would have a look at it, and if you could just take a look personally at that letter from her, because it goes into quite a bit of detail around the issues as she sees them as a pharmacist and how she has seen the location helping people.
Well, I mean, I have personally seen her responding to letters from a number of people, including Ballymena GP.
Yes.
And a group of people who came in and gave an extremely articulate presentation of the concerns they saw. Frankly, that is why we re-examined to see if it was possible to do anything with Railway Street.
Yes.
And that's why we're where we are at the moment.
Yes, thank you. Then the other issue that I did raise was that of, Mr. Capper said that he would take it away and look at it. That was the issue of NIACRO. And you're well aware of the valuable work that they do, both in integrating people back into society, helping young people with problems and the likes of that. Now, there's two elements, and I've outlined those. You've probably seen the Hansard from the last meeting. The money and what they do, it essentially keeps people out of prison, and we heard that a person being in prison is about, what, £63,000 per annum at cost to the public purse. I worked it out that the total amount invested in NIACRO from your department, I think it's about 400,000. That's 6 people approximately in prison, keeping 6 people in prison. Now, I have no doubts that they keep an awful lot of more people out of prison, away from care, and get them back onto the straight and narrow. But the second element to it is the very fact that they've got core funding from your department helps them lever in an awful lot more money, because the fact is other agencies and other funding bodies and the likes look at them and say, right, the department's backing you and the department's investing in you. you know the way it works as well as any of the rest of us. If there's core funding coming in from the department, that's seen as stable funding. Government recognises that you're a good body, that you do good work, and that they invest in you. Now, my concern is, one, that they continue with their valuable work, but two, that their potential to use the funding from the department as a catalyst to bring in, and as a signal to the wider world, that where those funding agencies are, to bring in that money. I would be concerned lest that too could be jeopardised, and then the overall impact wouldn't just be the 400,000 from your department, but that I think it's up to 3.6 million they draw in of other funding agencies and bodies. Those were the figures that were presented to me. But have you any thoughts further on that, Minister, just as to how that could be looked at? Because the last thing you want to be doing is being the penny wise and pound foolish. You cut 400,000 over here, but you wind up having to spend, I don't know, maybe upwards on $1 million or so in the prison service as a consequence of that.
Well, first of all, I have to disagree with your arithmetic, and not just the fact that you quote 63,000, and it's actually just over 60,000 anticipated for this year. But that is the...
Give or take 1,000,
yeah,
David,
no,
you're the man that knows the figures.
but that is fundamentally not the relevant figure. The cost per prisoner place is the figure we quote. And that is the entire cost of running the prison service, including headquarters, all other functions, divided by the number of places for prisoners.
Okay.
If you put one more person in prison, it doesn't cost that much. It's the marginal cost is a very modest sum for one more prisoner. And if you take one person out of prison, you don't save 60,000 a year.
Right.
You save a very marginal cost. So
how much?
I don't think we have exact figures, but frankly, you're not talking about any change in staffing, you're not talking about any change in headquarters, you're not talking about any change in fuel and power and so on and so forth. You're probably talking about the cost of their food, and that's about the marginal cost of an additional prisoner. So we are talking about very limited figures there. So whilst it's the kind of thing that a number of people have quoted, this project costs so much, weighed against 60,000 per prisoner place, that is simply not a valid figure in terms of the additional cost.
It would be helpful if we did get the valid figures, because if we're talking about what they are, I think that would be very useful to us. But anyway.
Well, frankly, it doesn't matter whether it's 2,000, 3,000 or 4,000. What I'm saying is it's nothing like 60,000.
It doesn't matter, right, okay. Right. Thought we were talking about the budget, but that's okay.
For the point of the argument you're making, there is something of a difference between 60,000 and 4,000, and it's not much different from the difference between 60,000 and 3,000. Well, that's the key point of being realistic about what keeping somebody out of prison actually saves per year.
Right.
It's not £60,000. It would be great if it was, but it isn't.
Right.
In terms of the issue of core funding and leverage and so on, I have recently been talking to NIACRO and Exeter, and I know that together with Start 360 and Prince's Trust, they are doing coordinated work around some of the rehabilitation work they do. That's all part of the partnership that we are seeking to do with them.
Yes.
I'm well aware of the benefits that we get from them. They are genuine partners, and we meet them on that basis. But it's like everything else at the moment. There are hard decisions being taken because of the budget settlement we have, and we're seeking to manage what we've got as best we can.
Okay. Chair, I stand corrected in some of my arithmetic, but I only work with the figures. I'm given a wee bit like yourself, or not given a wee bit like yourself. But so
I don't know if anybody ever asked us what the marginal cost was before now.
Well, there you are, David. To get back to this one, what are your views on it in terms of what can be done because of the work that it, and I'm sure everybody's coming to you, but I have particular interest in I value the work that they do. I really do. And I've seen some of the work that they do, and I've heard about some of the people that they have, and particularly young people that they have kept out of basically a career of criminality and prison again and again and again. So longer term, if somebody's repetitively going back into prison, I'm sure the cost would soon free up. Costs that none of us want to see your department or anyone else spending, whether it's for 1 year, 10 years, 20 years or whatever.
And it's the human cost just as much as the financial cost.
Absolutely.
Well, as I say, we are talking to those bodies which provide those sorts of rehabilitative services. We certainly welcome the work they are doing together. And, for example, in the context that there's an application for European social funding for some of the rehabilitation work, we have supplied letters of support. And we will see what comes from ESF to potentially support some of that, and then see what we can do to support it.
Would this be, I'm sorry for labouring this point, Dave, but I just want to know, would this be in terms of partnership funding from your department with an ESF? Is that the type of thinking that's
I mean, potentially, if they're looking for match funding, with the last conversation I had was talking about recognising that DOJ could not necessarily provide all of the match funding they were hoping they're seeking to engage with other partners as well. And we're having constructive discussions on that basis.
Right, okay, that's good to hear, that's all right. Okay, Chair, thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Minister and officials. Just a couple of points. The PSNI budget, is there any of that ring-fenced at all? I do recall after devolution of policing and justice there was a section of money for security ring-fenced, which I'm assuming was in the PSNI budget. Is that still there or not?
Yes, there is. Then we'll keep me right. £29.5 million specifically from the Treasury for security funding, for that specific purpose only.
Okay,
and then that's a continuation of what has happened over preceding years.
And is that 29.5 million that you got in this year's budget as well, as referenced in the document?
Yes, it's the same. It's the same figure as this year. It has averaged between 50 and 60 million pounds. Well, it was in total 249.5 million, I think, over 4 years. So it averaged just over 60.
Yeah, we got about 200 million over the current 4-year budget period from Treasury and about 45 million from the Executive.
Okay.
Or police.
So that 29, just for clarity, I'm just trying to get clarity, that 29.5 million that's referenced in this year's 15-16 is not additional to the original 29.5, that is the same 29.5 you were always getting?
Well, we actually got, it's partly complicated by the pattern between what we were given from Treasury and what we were given from DFP. In that, in the year that's currently ending, we got the largest sum from DFP and a smaller sum from Treasury towards that overall total of 50-something million. And as I understand, the 29.5 is the same figure for next year as this year from the Treasury.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the figure you have in your pack where there's a table of the budgets for each spending area, we note on that excludes the police security funding. So on top of the funding in your pack, you'll see elsewhere in the paper, we note the police will get a total of £58 million of security funding next year, of which, as the Minister has said, 29.5 million is the Treasury resource amount.
And the other money is coming from
the Executive.
From the Executive. So much is that? Sorry, not quick. That's another 20-something million.
So another 30 or so million from the Department's Executive allocation.
Okay, but that is additional. Or were you getting that in last year's budget as well?
We had £30 million from the Executive in the 14-15, i.e. this year's budget.
Okay.
That will roll forward.
So that security money is pretty similar. It's
by and large, yes.
All right. Regarding the prison service, are we still currently under staff complement? My understanding was because of the exit scheme that we were running under staff complement. Is that the situation?
We're running slightly low. I'm not sure about a complete balance between the three institutions at the moment. Certainly McGarry, I think, is the one which is somewhat below the standard complement.
And is it much below?
I don't have the figures with me on that today. We can get them for you.
And with the reducing prison service budget, do you see that shortfall being made up?
Well, there's the issue of the balance between expenditure on overtime to ensure that landings are appropriately staffed and employing more staff. And that is an issue which prison service is now having to look at, given the budget they've now got defined.
Okay. And have they given any indication which is their preference, finding more staff or paying more overtime?
Well, I think there's always a preference to not depend upon too much overtime, except in the short term.
Okay. But again, sorry for labouring that point, but I'm assuming, though, irrespective of whether you get
or whether they get additional staff, prison service get additional staff, or they utilise more overtime, they're still going to have some difficulty meeting all their needs within the prison service and staffing arrangements.
They have a fairly difficult budget settlement, the same as others do, yes.
What is the longer term impact on that for the prison service and for prisoners?
Frankly, that needs to be worked out by prison service now. Now they see their final budget, so it may be something which is worth sending you a briefing paper on the detail of that when there's a bit further work through.
Have they given you any indication? Did they make a response actually to the budget proposals?
They didn't make a response in that sense. They took part in the internal discussions. Unfortunately, this. Given that I've got my regular stock take with the Director General, I think tomorrow this is unfortunately not the right day to be discussing the detail of it. But
Another point would be
Yes.
that prisons were one of the bodies that received a bit of an adjustment between the budget and final budget. So on the back of that, they will be revisiting their savings delivery plans and seeing what the impact is now on the basis of their final budget. And that should be very soon. So we'd be in a position to share that with you hopefully very soon.
Okay, it'd be useful, I think, Chair, if we could get that as soon as reasonably possible. And again, my final point is around the closure of the courthouses. I know it's not in your budget, but it is in the consultation that forms part of the trying to reduce your budget. There has been an issue for quite a long time, and I do appreciate the point you're making in that some cases are getting to court and through the courts quicker than they had been. However, to many and to most people, it's still not quick enough, and there's a lot of work to be done there with delays. I'm just wondering, it's a follow-on almost from Mr McGuinness's point, how you would actually intend to manage that, given that there doesn't seem to be enough court space as it is, or enough availability of courts to actually manage the process as it is. Surely that's going to create more time delays.
well, the paper that was put to me, and the committee now has the basis for the consultation paper, showed the scheme by which the current number of court sittings could be put into the buildings which are being proposed to be retained. So it certainly does require more intensive use. But there are, at the moment, whilst there's a general perception of courthouses being busy, there are a number of cases where not every courtroom in a courthouse is being used, even in that peak mid-morning to lunchtime period. So, there are options to see that we ensure that we make the maximum use of the rooms which are available.
I have to say, Minister, if they're not being used at present, it's very difficult to see how they can be maximised if you close a number of the courthouses. Why are they not being used to a maximum at the moment to at least clear some of the backlog? I have to say that it seems to be very, very poor management if they haven't been utilised to their full potential at the moment.
But it's the issue of the number of courtrooms available compared to the number of judges to sit in them, and staff to support the judges.
But sorry, Minister, you said not all the courtrooms were being used or utilised. Now you're saying that it's the judges and their officials are not available. It's either one or the other.
Well, no, sorry, you asked why the courtrooms are not being fully used. Because there aren't that many judges and there aren't that many sittings scheduled. The important issue is that if we centralise in a smaller number of courthouses, it actually becomes easier to manage court listings more flexibly. If there are 2 or 3 judges sitting in the same courthouse at the same time, if there are lists which are longer and lists which are shorter. But if there's a judge sitting in courthouse X and using one of the 2 courtrooms, and there is another judge sitting 12 miles away in a courthouse with a spare room as well, putting the 2 together provides greater flexibility to get the list operating more efficiently, as well as ensuring that you're only maintaining one building and using both rooms every day.
I still don't see how it is actually going to speed up the process, Minister. Have we? Is that paper available to us?
It's later on the agenda. We'll have a discussion around it.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Patsy wanted very quick.
Very brief one, thanks, Chair. Minister, it's following on the theme of what we discussed earlier about if there were increased numbers of people going into prison, and then you mentioned there that there were prison officers, there were reduced numbers of prison officers. Is there a mandatory or an acceptable prison officer to prisoner ratio beyond which you shouldn't drop?
Well, the issue is the ratio of the number of staff available on any house or any landing at a particular time, and that will vary at different times of the day. It will vary with the architecture of the building. For example, the square houses at Magabry require more staff to manage safely than some of the newer facilities with the wider open landings. I mean, those are individual lounges. I mean, that's why we have seen a number of lockdowns in November and December, because staff weren't available.
Yes, but my question being, I don't know, I'm trying to find out, is there
There's no
benchmark below which it cannot or it should not drop? In other words, you're moving into code red or whatever it may be.
There's no global figure, as I understand it. The figure is for managing the individual units at any one time. And clearly, fewer staff are required if individuals are locked in their cells than if there's free association on landings and so on. So, I mean, that's why there are differences through the day. There are differences depending on the configuration of the building.
But there isn't an agreement or whatever with the POA around this, no? Around acceptable levels of staffing?
As I understand it, POA are consulted around staffing levels, but it's not that the issue is the global number of prison officers employed.
No, I realise
it's how management is applying in any house at any time.
Yes, I realise it could be high security and all that sort of stuff. I appreciate that. I'm just asking because I don't know if there is some sort of an understanding or a guideline or a benchmark or criteria that exists for it.
Well, I mean, certainly as part of the work which flowed from the prison review team, there was a reprofiling exercise done of the staffing requirements of the prison service. I mean, that's what fed into the voluntary exit scheme for prison officers. But I mean, these matters, as they do change over time, depending upon the precise circumstances of a particular house, and they change during the working week, as well as being different at night time.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's been useful. Minister, you're staying on for the next agenda item. Lynn, Dan, thank you very much for... Minister, you'll bring... Our officials will come and brief us on the legal aid issue once you have firm proposals for the executive, is that right?
When we have firm proposals, we will be at the committee as soon as possible, taking Mr. Poots' injunction in order. Thank you, Edward.
Okay. Okay, members, and we move on to agenda item 5, is the reconstitution of the Northern Policing Board. You'll recall we had a brief discussion with this previously. The next reconstitution is due to take place by May of this year, at the end of the current 4-year appointment term for independent members. A range of options were considered. The ministers decided not to automatically reappoint existing eligible independent members and instead reconstitute the board and appoint independent members by way of a public appointment process by May of this year. Members who are eligible to apply for a second term may do so. The Minister also proposed to adopt a rolling appointments model for independent members effective from 2017, whereby every year 3 independent members are appointed or reappointed, and this would end the current arrangements whereby 9 independent members are appointed or reappointed every 4 years. Also proposed to revise the remuneration rates for the 20 competition officers for a more appropriate level. Can I welcome Anthony Harbinson, Director of Safer Communities Directorate, and Rosemary Crawford, Deputy Director of Policing Policy and Strategy Division. I just advise you that we're going to Hansard this as well. It came about from, I think, a little bit of confusion around particularly the rolling reappointment procedure. I think there was concern highlighted by a member that this would be every year you could pick and choose which members would leave, as opposed to a third type of system that works on many boards now in order to keep capacity. So I'm not sure if you want to just brief us on some of the your proposals, and then we'll open up the questions and get some clarification, hopefully.
Well, thank you, Chair. You set out some of the key points and saved me, I think, the first page of my notes. But if my voice lasts, I will try to set out some of the key points and then answer any questions. I mean, you've highlighted the issue of the 2 changes. The first change is around the arrangements for appointing independent members. The committee will be aware that under the Police Northern Ireland Act, the responsibility for appointing independent members of the Policing Board falls to me as Minister. The legislation provides for 9 independent members to be appointed for a term of up to 4 years, and they may be reappointed for a second term. The current board is due to be reconstituted in the summer of this year when the independent member's term expires. Until now, we've had the situation that independent members have been appointed following the Assembly elections when the political makeup of the board is known. But we now have the extension of the Assembly term, the introduction of a 5-year mandate, which has effectively decoupled the current arrangements for the independent members from those which will apply for political members. It's not of my making, and we're seeking to deal with the situation we're in. It's a consequence around that decision on the Assembly, but it does provide the opportunity to consider how we appoint the independent members. My concern is to ensure that we have the board appointing efficiently and effectively, and that we have the necessary skills and build-up of experience to robustly hold the Chief Constable to account. And it's important that we have best public appointments procedures in place. I have a specific responsibility on the policing board, which is, I think, almost unique to the board, to maintain community balance. Vital both in practice and in perception to generate the community confidence that the board needs. Now, under the existing arrangements, political parties can change their membership at any time, and they frequently do, as you, Chair, know. In contrast, we have the 9 members, the independent members, appointed once en bloc for a 4-year term, which does have an impact on the cohesion and the continuity of the board. It risks the loss of the skills and experience and knowledge that's been built up at the end of that 4-year term. And the classic example was the last reconstitution in 2011, when of the 19 members, only 1 political member and 2 independent members had previously served on the board. The 2 independent members were the outgoing chair and vice chair, but everybody else was new. And it did result in a significant loss of knowledge and experience. Learning from that, we're trying to look now in these changed circumstances because of the Assembly change as to how we deal with that. Building on the good work the current independent members have done over the last 4 years, and acknowledging that it takes time for people to get to grips with the work of the board. So there were 4 options considered in the consultation paper, and I am currently minded to move away from that wholesale change every 4 years in favour of a more gradual and phased appointment to ensure greater continuity for the board and not the complete loss of knowledge and experience which can otherwise happen every 4 years, and to provide new talent and fresh opportunities to come forward on a more regular basis. It's a proposal which is supported by the Commissioner for Public Appointments. He stated that it should provide a fair, merit-based and effective means of appointment. It's the staggered approach which is now used, as you've said, Chair, by a number of other bodies. There are various possible permutations. I shan't bore the committee with all that we considered before we put proposals forward. But I think the simplest one is the proposed model we've put forward based on 3-year terms, which effectively would mean that once we get into that system, each year 3 of the 9 independent members, 1/3, would be appointed or reappointed, with 6 continuing in office for either a further year or a further 2 years before they come to that, each person being eligible for appointment for a second term, which is the standard Capani arrangement for public appointments, 1 or 2 terms. I certainly believe that it gives the opportunity to maintain community confidence, a point which was made strongly by the independent members on the 14th of January, because it maintains a continuity of experience and skills, and it ensures that people can see that that experience is built up and there's a robust holding to account and overseeing of the work done by the police service. So that's the key point of that. If I go on just briefly to speak about the issue of remuneration, Chair, it's clear that the current rates which are paid to members of the Policing Board are very significantly in excess of those payable to members of any other public body across Northern Ireland. And in the challenging financial environment, I frankly don't believe they're sustainable. What I've proposed is more affordable, it's a more realistic level of remuneration. I believe they're in line with the rates payable to other public bodies in Northern Ireland, more appropriate and sufficient to continue to attract the individuals that we need, of the calibre that we need for that role. So I think that the proposals in the consultation paper will ensure greater cohesion, greater continuity of experience. It will ensure the board has the necessary skills and knowledge to hold the Chief Constable and the PSNI to account. And they take best practice of public appointments into account to do it in a fair, merit-based and effective manner. I welcome certainly the issues which have been raised by the committee And certainly at this stage, I'm keen to hear the views of the committee as to how the process should be run. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Minister. I must say I think it's a sensible approach. The rolling model, I think, is a sensible approach in order to keep capacity on the board. In terms of the community balance of the independent members, obviously you have to be cognizant of community balance at any one time. So during any of the appointments on a yearly basis, you have to ensure that the overall balance remains representative of the community. So it's not the case that incrementally over time the community balance would shift. At any one time, the community balance has to be reflected in the community. Is that right?
At any one time, membership of the board has to be representative of the community. But it does mean, for example, there were problems last time when I think 1 of the 10 political members was female. Now, I appointed 3 females out of 9, which was a higher proportion of females appointed than had come through the selection process in an attempt to improve that aspect of community balance. But obviously I also have to take into account at least elements of geography and, in this society, the perceived community background of those who serve on the board. And it is a matter that the reality in this society is I don't think the balance of those appointed from amongst MLAs is likely to change very significantly election by election, but it does provide the opportunity to keep the balance broadly correct, because I don't think we can stick everybody into a rigid pigeonhole. But it gives us the opportunity, and if there are corrections that need to be made, then they can be made sooner than the 4 years which would currently be the position.
Okay, I think it's clear enough. Patsy?
Thanks very much, Chair. Just if you could talk me through this again, to hear the rationale of it. Potentially, the legislation allows for, and sometimes, yes, members dip off and on, the elected members dip off and on. But an elected member could be there for 5 years, if the new term is 5 years. But an independent member won't be.
We'll have a 3-year term, renewable, so a maximum of 6 years.
Well, my point being is they may or may not be. So the question is, what's the difference between an elected member and an independent member? In terms of experience, in terms of wherewithal, in terms of knowledge that's needed and the likes, aside from the obvious one.
Well, I think the answer to that is I can do nothing about the elected members. Well, sorry, I can do something about one of the elected members at the present time.
Yes.
But, the reality is I don't see how it would be possible to manage the issue of the elected members. There are issues for the parties to consider when nominating officers put names forward. But I do believe in terms of that part of the board, the independent members, which is on the lines of any other body appointed by the public appointments procedure, then I think we are looking to the best possible arrangement for those 9.
Yes.
The other point, sorry, just to make it, is things have changed already. Independent members can only have a 4-year term under the current regulations.
Yes,
Political members have a 5-year, so you automatically have a gap.
Yes.
So if you run it on, then the next time it'll be 3 and 5, and the next time it'll be 2 and 5.
The obvious thing is there, with the greatest respect to Mr. Harbison, you make them coterminous. Make them see him.
And that's primary legislation.
Well,
change.
At present, there will be no limit on how many terms a political member could serve. So effectively, you have that scenario already where a political member is being treated differently.
The obvious question is, one, what are you doing to harmonise the two levels?
But that assumes that harmonisation is a prerequisite, as opposed to what we are seeking to do to provide refreshment and that balance between those who are relatively new amongst the independent members and those who have served longer periods, so that people gradually build up the expertise we need.
Just then back to this, what consultation has been done around this issue?
Well, the formal consultation I was required to do was with First Minister, Deputy First Minister and the local councils, which I interpreted in this case as both 26 existing councils and 11 shadow councils. We then consulted wider with the members of the board, with the Ombudsman. Rosemary will now keep me right as the full list.
With the Commissioner for Public Appointments, with this committee, and obviously with some other key stakeholders, the police service, the police ombudsman, HMIC, Sagini and the Equality Commission.
Right. And that was your statutory 12-week consultation, was it?
It was a targeted consultation that started on the 19th of December. We had initially intended that, partly driven by the fact that in order to make the appointments on time, we needed to make sure that we consulted views and planned the appointment process. It had initially been intended that the consultation would close on the 16th of January, but a number of people, particularly the independent members of the board, had indicated that they felt they needed longer, not least because it was over the Christmas and New Year
Can you
period.
give me those dates again, please? Where am I from?
Yes, the consultation was launched on the 19th of December and it was extended to the 30th of January.
But it was to close on the 16th,
On the
of January.
16th, yeah.
So, wasn't much consultation there. Around Christmas and New Year.
It was significantly more people consulted than the statutory obligation.
So the statutory obligation is for, what, 4 weeks over the Christmas period and New Year period?
But there's nothing in the technical statutory requirements which says that that is not adequate for...
But that's what you've done. You know, many of us have stood up there in the House and have accused people of launching consultations in the mouth of holiday period or whenever the Assembly is just about to go into recess and all this. And certainly this was worse than that. The Assembly was already in recess and we're into the mouth of the Christmas period.
The statutory consultation was with First Minister, the Deputy First Minister and the District Councils. So as the Minister says, we extended that beyond
Yes.
that. And it is a fair point, and it was one, as I said, was made to us by some members, and on that basis we accepted the point
For a fortnight.
that we extended until the end of
And
January.
you are aware that the councils don't meet in December after the date that you have? Councils meet usually in their first week in December, or maybe around the second
Well, I would
week.
certainly have expected from my background knowledge that every council would have had a meeting in January.
Of course it would. And
And
you're
has the
giving
opportunity
giving
to
them a
comment
couple
in
of
that.
weeks to consult. Sorry, but I don't accept this period of consultation. Normally you get 12 weeks and you don't launch it in the mouth of Christmas or the New Year.
Well, in terms of the necessity of getting arrangements underway in order to make the appointments this year, there was a limited time in which to do that.
Well, if there's limited time, I have to think you would start a week earlier. But now, can you tell me that there's a full equality impact assessment done in this?
No, why would there need to be?
Well, I would have thought that if your aims and objectives are balance of appointments and appointees and that, you would consider the implications of it. And
But why does appointing people in 3 tranches make any difference to the equality aspects from that which I'm legally obliged to do, however members are appointed?
sorry, but you said you wanted to correct balances, and I would have thought that it would be important that you do the likes of that, particularly if it winds up, with all respect, you're sort of always winding up in a higgledy-piggledy type of mess type situation. You appoint for a year, or maybe 2 years or 3 years.
No, well, any process which has that kind of phased appointment has to have a starting point.
Yes, and you don't want to
But
make
it's
sure
not.
you do it right.
And that's exactly what we've done.
Well, it's not a good start, a couple of weeks consultation. With the greatest due respect, Minister.
But in terms of the equality issue, we have consulted the Equality Commission, but there's no issue for doing an EQIA on this point. And no concerns have been raised by the Equality Commission.
So, right, you're not doing an equality impact on it, no?
Well, can you explain why there would be an equality impact assessment on the way in which people are appointed when there is a statutory requirement to have regard to the appropriate community balances?
Well, that's for your officials to advise you on that, but I would have thought...
Well, I'm asking for your comments since you seem unhappy about it.
Well, obviously I'm not happy about it because it seems a bit of a mess already, to be honest with you. Chair, it's interesting nonetheless, the consultation and absence of EQIA and one thing or another.
Well, sorry, if you screen things out and there is no equality impact,
yes,
and you've consulted the Equality Commission, why would you do an EQIA when you've screened out any differential impact?
Well, sorry, my point being is here, you're launching into something which is completely new terrain. You're launching into something which to me is, you're not even coterminous with the appointment of elected members. Whenever, at the very start, Mr. Harbison here says what you do is, if you want to harmonise things, you harmonise things. This is making a big distinction between the appointment period of elected members and individual independent members. And I really don't think that it's going to wind up in consistency. It's rather than that, it's going to wind up in a bit of a mess.
Sorry, explain why. I mean, you keep saying it's a mess, but you haven't explained why it's a mess.
Well, I thought I had outlined that. Anyway,
You need to help us all.
5 years, 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, you know, if that's not a recipe for...
Sorry. Umpteen different public bodies have phased appointment procedures. They're not a mess. Are you suggesting Invest NI is a mess because people are appointed at different times?
I have to say, I take this one very serious because our own party, like yours, was there during the whole negotiations of the Good Friday Agreement, patent proposals for a pacing board which is accountable to the community. And the approach up until now just really has been kind of whatever you're having yourself, including the consultation period. And I really treat it very seriously, Minister. If the issue had been to rectify imbalances, if the issue had been to harmonise appointments to it, I would have thought you would want to harmonise all appointment periods to it for the period of time to make sure that every's...
But you can't harmonise all appointment procedures because
just to clarify-
party nominating officers can vary at any time.
Just to clarify that point, I mean, at present, on the policing board, many parties will rotate on an annual basis. So
Yes.
political members will only serve for 1 year.
Yes.
Whereas independent members will serve for their full term of 4 years.
But likewise, they can serve up to 5 years.
Political members have no restrictions at all.
It's a 4-year maximum at the moment.
Or sorry,
Well, under the
with the...
Politicians can
yes,
go on for
under the-
5 years, yes.
Yes,
under the current statute.
Yes.
yes. So I really don't understand where you're coming from on this one, Minister, at all.
But I cannot see why you imagine there is such merit in appointing independent members for the same period of time as politicians, when we've highlighted the problems with the changeover of everybody all at once. A board starting off 4 years ago with only 3 out of 19 people who had served on the board,
Yes.
with all those problems, as opposed to the opportunity to build up expertise. And as the chair has just said, the fact that 5 nominating officers can change 10 members at a whim between them.
Yes. And believe it or not, it happens in an assembly too.
But also, there's no change to who can apply, who can come forward. I mean, the only thing we're varying here is the length of time that they can spend in their first term and then their second term. But there's no impact on terms of who can apply, gender, creed, political background, disability. Everybody can still apply in exactly the same way as they could before. The only thing we're changing is, instead of having up to a maximum of 2 4-year terms,
Yes.
they will have a maximum of 2 3-year terms.
Which is...
So I'm not sure
so
what
you're going 6 years... Sorry, just tell me. So he could be on there for 6 years.
Yes.
An elected member could be on up to, on the proposal, 5 years.
No,
No,
an elected member
unlimited.
could be on there forever.
No, sorry. I mean, within the terms, you could be on, yes, you could be reappointed again. But what I mean is, say you're appointed, the duration is 5 years for the term of the Assembly, right? The proposed new term in the Assembly. And then within that, you have varied permutations of somebody could be on for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
No.
No.
Once the process is running, independent members will be appointed for 3 years,
3 years.
or possibly reappointed to do 6 years.
Yes.
But it's not
It's 3
permutations
or
of 1,
6.
2, 3.
It's not 1 2 3. It's 3 or 6.
That's,
Right, just to clarify, the consultation paper did talk about the transitional period.
Yeah.
And to get us into that process, there may be appointments for 2, 3 or 4 years.
So it's the same as an Invest Northern Ireland or Northern Ireland Tourist Board type arrangement. where
Stuart thinks you don't understand.
Stuart thinks I don't understand. But
With respect, Chair, it's a perfectly simple and competent process that's used throughout the public service to appoint people.
well, very good, but it doesn't seem to be that among the community, because there is some
The
reflecting
community
concern.
seems to understand it everywhere else.
Well, the community, sorry, Chair, I'm reflecting concerns that are within the community of the process and the approach to this, and the lack of consultation around it, and the mixed messages that have been sent out as a consequence of that. So, Chair, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Raymond?
Thank you very much. Had you received any analysis or report saying that the current setup wasn't working well?
Well, I have certainly discussed with officials the way of ensuring that the board works as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
I've discussed the issue with the independent members of, the current independent members of the board, about the, the potential for a change to appointment process.
That's not quite the question I asked. Did anybody tell you that the current setup already in place for 10 years, or whatever number of years, isn't working properly?
Well, I have certainly seen for myself the difficulties of what happens when you change almost the complete board in one go.
Plus the fact...
Right, but again, so there's no official analysis, or nobody has stepped in and saying this board, as it's now constituted, in terms of capacity or doing its job in a corporate way, are doing anything in an improper way.
Nobody's suggesting anyone's doing anything improperly, but the reason for the trigger for this is the fact that we do now not have coterminosity with the assembly period. So the board has to be renewed in May of this year. So that was the trigger point for looking at this. And when we did, we looked back, as you would expect, to see what have been the successes, the weaknesses and the failures going forward. And one of the facts that we looked at was the last time we reconstituted the board, out of 19 members that went forward to the new board, only 3 of them had previous experience. That was 16 members with absolutely no experience. And every member, I think, both political and independent, would say there's a big learning curve going on to the board and learning what the PSNI and the justice system does. So this was to try and avoid those cliff-hanging phases. And it is only out for consultation. That's why we put the paper out, to ask people.
Well, I know it's right, but you could have, would there be a mechanism to reappoint independent members, and that would have given you more stability? Just a straight reappointment process for independent members?
Well, I mean, there is a potential reappointment process.
Yes.
But the danger, I mean, well, 2 of the current 9 members could not be reappointed this year because they've done they're finishing their second term. But there's a danger then if we appointed 7, that at the next changeover period, you've got all of that falling off the cliff at one go, and potentially even the 2 new ones, 1 or 2 of them might stay. So you would be running through that problem, as as frankly we've seen in a number of public bodies.
But there's a sort of impression given here that the only way, or the best way, because I assume that compliance with policy on public appointment, as set out by the Commissioner for Public Appointments, would apply to the current board as it's now constituted. That's a statement you can make about the current provision.
It's compliance, but my understanding is the Commissioner's recommendation is the phased rolling appointment process is better.
That's why I haven't seen that, so I maybe have to say that, because in relation to, in November, you appointed the probation board for fixed terms. No rolling process in the probation board.
It's an NEPB, yes, you're right, it's set up in a different way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this sort of idea that, this is the best practice
But it's,
within your own department, you had an opportunity in November to say, well, this is how we do it in this department, so we're going to bring it in probation board. Youth Justice Agency appoints 5 independent members, fixed term.
sorry, the
The Youth Justice Agency have 5 independent members.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't?
No.
Right, well,
It has
you need
to.
to update well, there's 2 and then an R3, according to your own website.
And the website must be wrong, apologies for that. It's
So those 2 will take it the 2 that you're saying for a fixed term? Are they for a fixed term?
They for a fixed term, yes, they were.
So the idea of a fixed term isn't this sort of, anomaly for the policing board?
No, the anomaly for the policing board is the elected representatives who are on board directly, and their coterminosity has now been changed.
Yeah, and it could have been corrected by just making coterminous a board that seems to be working well. And I think it would be a bad error of judgment to present the policing board as just another public appointed body. We all know the importance of it in relation to policing. We know the importance of it in terms of confidence within the community. And this type of tinkering can lead people to believe that perhaps people aren't happy sometimes with the way that the board performs, and this is a way of disrupting this work.
But the individual independent members are still appointed for a fixed term.
Yes,
Yeah.
or 3 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
But it could be 5 years, and then you wouldn't have this rolling process, which means that saying somebody after 3 years, we can decide you're no longer suitable. Where at least when you sit down as a board, working collectively, we've seen it in practice. People might have us criticisms of it, but at least people grow together. And there are situations where people said it, we've seen it in committees, and we would have admitted ourselves in committees, that after 2 years being on a committee and you move to another one, it takes you a long way to catch up, and sometimes you can maybe feel overawed by the experience of the people around the table. So that has a weakness as well. You know, this sort of idea
I
of...
think there is a general drift towards this sort of setup and
Yeah, but
boards, though.
the point I would make, Chair, is the drift might be okay, and I'm not doubting that, but in terms of the policing board is a different animal from many of our public appointments. And tinkering with this can lead people to a suspicion that perhaps people aren't happy with the makeup of the board. Sometimes independent members are perhaps too independent. And therefore, if you're on a 3-year lease, you're out after 3 years. I don't think that sends a very good signal when the date and the framers of Patton had it that the independent members would be there for the same term as all our members. Now you're telling them that they cannot differ.
Be there for longer.
Hmm?
They could be there for longer. They could be there for longer.
Yeah, of course, yeah, they can be there for longer. But that's not the point. But they can be there for shorter too. They can be there for shorter. So it works both ways. So my sort of suggestion, and I haven't heard you saying what's already there isn't broken. So it's the old adage, if it's not broken, why would you want to fix it? And I don't think you provided a rationale to fix it.
It is broken at the moment. It's broken in the fact that
No, but
it's no longer coterminosity.
I mean, there's a lot of things around the extra year. You know, we had to come together and put together a budget. We had to do our appointments around 5 years because of the 5 years. I think we can get round the table and come up with a solution. They have it as it once was.
Yes, that can be done. It's through primary legislation.
And then the other suspicion that Patsy touched on it, and I say this with great respect, like it's nearly the script for Westminster. When do you have a consultation? On the 19th of December. Yeah. You know, I don't think number 2s would even go that bad. You know, I mean, but it's that type of thing that allows people to say the 19th of December you have a consultation. I mean, someone phoned me the next day, they says this way for consultation, and I had to admit to say I never heard of it. You know, so like none of us in the Justice Committee were told that this was coming. The Minister said before...
Speaking according to the legislation, we didn't need to tell the Justice Committee at all.
I accept that.
I mean, don't say we're not consulting when we're actually consulting significantly wider than we're legally obliged.
Fine, but if you're trying to convince people, then perhaps the best way to convince people is to work along with them rather than people feeling that you're trying to do something in a sleight of hand. And I think most people looking at this, I would say if any other department tried this, quite legitimately people would be saying, that's the rest of it. We've heard about consultations over the summer. Ministers get salted for saying they're going to have an 8-week consultation and it's starting on the 1st of August. We've all said it. Perhaps about our ministers, and we defend our own minister, and that's fine. But I think in terms of public perception, there's a time to consult and a time not to consult.
But in the concept of a narrow, targeted consultation, which went significantly beyond the statutory obligation, it's not a public consultation about a major policy change, the introduction of legislation potentially. It is a consultation which went beyond those who we were obliged to consult.
But I say this with the greatest respect, in terms of the policing board, the sensitivity would be in order. The policing board isn't, you know, with respect, AMA or the tourist board or anything. This is a very, you know, rock solid component of Patton. And when you even seen it with the discussion around the PCSPs and, you know, the DPPs and where we're going to go, a lot of people were sensitive around it because they are the confidence building measures that people look to say that's how we're protected in terms of policing. And they tinker with it. To me, I get to have great judgment, and there's aspects of this to be spur judgment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And again, this isn't necessarily a question and answer session here, and I do recognise that the Minister did ask for our views. And I'm sure the committee will get a view. I'm sure the Minister will hear the view of the committee overall shortly on it. Again, some of the terms that's been used is an independent member can be too independent. I just find that staggering. I know Patsy used the word hickory-pickory. I think it's a great word. I really do. It's amazing. And Mary, 2 words. Well, if you enjoyed it together, but I'm completely relaxed with this. To me, this is a rollout of how public agencies should be doing it. And to make an argument that states that an independent member or three will be completely overwhelmed or overawed in a scenario where everybody else around them has had a level of experience and support or training in the recent past, I think is very, very weak. I think it's very, very weak for a number of reasons. You have to start somewhere. And I would rather start somewhere whereby I know the people around me have a certain level and degree of experience and knowledge about the situations and the topics we're talking about. I would feel really nervous and worried if I didn't really know what I was talking about and I realised that nobody else around the table knew what they were talking about. Sometimes I feel that way in a committee. So it is vitally important, I think, that we move forward here. Because the last thing we want is a period of about 1.5 to 2 years every 5 years whereby we lose all capacity, all experience, all expertise, and that's not being disrespectful to any new appointees, because we all have to start somewhere, and there's no doubt about it. On something like the policing board, there'll be a massive level of learning and experience to be gained. I think if we treat the policing board as something special or different, I think we're dooming it to failure. It's there to do a certain role, a specific role. No other body has a role like it. But don't treat it as if it's some sort of golden fleece or some sort of panacea that has to be retained in a concrete form forever and a day. Just like patent, things will have to move. Things will have to adjust as time and budget dictates. So we can't keep things in a stone age or in a tablet of stone. Things have to evolve, and it has to have the agility to evolve. And I think this adds agility to the whole concept. The one question I have, if you're interested, Minister, in questions, is the appointments made at the very start. Because I know that at the minute we're in one system, and we have to move in our system, and there will be a period of flux. And that is the appointments made by random selection of members of 2, 3 and 4 terms. Are we saying that's pure random? Or will there be a point scoring mechanism whereby whoever gains more points will be the 4-year termers?
No, my understanding is the most justifiable way of appointing people in those circumstances, if you've got existing members being, some existing members being reappointed but not others, is that you literally don't say, because they've been around, we give them a short term, whatever, you say random draw. It's, it's slightly bizarre, but it's actually more justifiable than it's another way of trying to assess it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because any other way, if you have a point scoring mechanism, you could argue then that the best person gets the highest points, who then becomes a 4-year terminee as opposed to a 2-year, which again, would give
But again, remember, I recently made appointments in which effectively I was obliged to take the recommendations that came to me in order of merit and appoint from the top.
Yeah.
But given the key requirements about getting balance on the policing board, it is not a matter of doing that, and that's why the random process, is much the fairest and most appropriate way of doing it for the policing board.
Yeah.
And again, that is really just the first go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who gets 2 years? Who gets 3 years? Who gets 4 years?
And once that's
going, then people are then on to the 3-year terms from then.
Yeah, okay. And again, Chair, as I say, for the record, I'm content and quite comfortable with this. Some members might feel there's some sort of Trojan horse involved in all of this, but I'm very relaxed with it all.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I've just a few things that I would like clarified, and it's okay to go on to the remuneration rates. Is that okay? Minister, I put down this list, the new rates here, and I think you've particularly in terms of independent members, I think you've reduced to 12,000. Is that right?
Yes.
12 for members, yes.
The ordinary members will get 12.
Could you explain the rationale how you actually got these figures? Let me just give you an example. Certainly when I was on the policing board, it says here about 48 days per year. Certainly more than 48 days. In fact, I was told by a member of the SDLP, some of you could be there two days a week. The board meeting itself would take you 4 or 5 hours just reading the papers, apart from anything else. So I'm just wondering in relation to that. And secondly, it says here that the rates would be £404 a day. Is that still the rate? Is that what it's still going to be? The daily rate?
No, there is no daily rate at the moment. That's just an equivalence. At the moment, the members get 19,437 per annum.
Okay. Yeah, but that's based on a rate up to now.
It's just been a figure up to now. It hasn't been based on a daily rate.
Well, it says here, remember daily rate?
What we've done is we've said that that is the standard number of days, and we've therefore produced how much that would be per day as an average.
Right. And I agree with 99 point, whatever it is, of what Paul said. One of the things I would disagree in terms of, if you look down that list of other organisations, the policing board is different in that, from a security point of view. I mean, I don't know if any of those other organisations would have had, was it a £500 bomb left outside the premises. So I'm saying that for people, including the politicians, it's a big commitment, very responsible, but also quite a dangerous job been on. So I'm just surprised that that the salary was reduced from 19,000 right down to 12,000, and if people are going to be doing that minimum amount of hours, days of 48, and it's certainly, as I say, any board member tell you it's certainly more than 48 days per year.
But, I mean, two possible comparators. I take your point about security issues, Sally. On the other hand, if you look at something like a Health and Social Care Trust, given that Edwin's sitting beside you, the level of responsibilities which can apply to a board member there are pretty significant. My understanding is that the chair of the Belfast Trust gets paid $35,000 a year, equating to something like £220 a day nominal, which is actually less than the nominal rate, and you may disagree on the number of days for ordinary members of this. When you look at the sort of challenges which apply across the health and social care system at the moment, I'm not sure that there's that big a difference between the policing board and that. And I mean, certainly what we're proposing is broadly comparable to the only equivalent policing body in the UK, the Scottish Police Authority, because England and Wales now having police and crime commissioners, there's no comparison to that single full-time salaried person.
Well, Manager, maybe what is right, I think you're right, is the whole security aspect of and people's personal security would join a board like that. And it's not like any other policing board across the United Kingdom. It is in most of those areas. But in terms of people's own personal security, could I just ask, and again, this is purely from my own point of view, how did you arrive at going from 19 to 12? Is that comparison to the other?
It was looking at a comparison across other public boards in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, you're not quite right. Patsy, I didn't get the
Sorry,
sorry.
I didn't just one thing, Mr. Harbison.
He wants the consultation reopened.
Haven't closed.
I know that, Tom.
What consultation? I was going to ask, Mr. The issue around the harmonisation of the terms, the duration, or the bringing it up to 5. You mentioned legislation. Just what would be the time frame around that?
It depends on how long it would take us to find a suitable bill to take it through on, and then whatever time it takes to go through the normal parliamentary process.
Right.
So you could be talking anywhere from 1 to 3 years working its way through. It just, as I say, it wouldn't be in this mandate. It would have to be in the following mandate. So.
And then paragraph 15 is proposed that new members, this is the transition reading, will be assigned a term length by random selection.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, if you were talking, if the argument before was around experience and all those types of things, random selection,
That was the method that was recommended by the Commissioner of Public Appointments, because otherwise then you bring a lot of subjectivity in. Why do I give that person 2 years and why did I give that person 4 years? Unfortunately, to get to a 3-year rolling for every future appointment, we had to stagger it in some way. We could have went 1, 2, 3, but we decided that 2, 3, 4 was a better way to make sure that anybody coming on got a reasonable period on. So if you had a look at it in the round, if it's a completely new member who comes on, they can get 2, 3 or 4. And if they get a second appointment of 3, that means they would do a maximum of 5, 6 or 7. If it's an existing member, they will have already done 4 years, so it means they would do a maximum of either 6, 7 or 8. So that everybody should be in roughly the same territory.
Okay, thank you.
And Raymond, very, very quickly.
We're in support of the remuneration proposal as laid out by the department.
Okay. We can escape this time. Get out quick before a finger goes up here somewhere. Sure. Okay, members. Engaging my emotional intelligence here, I'm gathering there's not consensus around the room on the way forward in this, but I think it was useful the Minister is here, so he will have a clear indication of some of the concerns that some members have expressed and support from other members. So I think we can just park the issue, and the Minister will be aware of the various views around the committee. So if we can move on then to agenda item 6, back to the Justice Bill and the amendment by the Attorney General. This is from the Department of Health, Social Service, Public Safety. Will give us evidence on a proposed amendment by the Attorney General. Relevant papers, which include a summary of the written evidence, you will find from pages 107 through to 162 of your packs. I welcome Dr. Paddy Woods, Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Fergal Bradley, Director of Safety, Quality and Standards Directorate, and David Best, Head of Learning, Litigation and Service Framework Development Branch in the Department for Health. We are hand sorting this session. It will be on the website in due course. So, in your own time, if you want to brief us through them, we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for this opportunity to give evidence in relation to the Attorney General's proposed amendment to the 1959 Coroners Act. You've introduced my colleagues, David and Fergal. It's very timely, this evidence session, in that, on the back of the publication of the report by Sir Liam Donaldson, who looked into the area of openness and transparency in terms of reporting deaths and other matters. He highlighted in his report the complexities surrounding the appropriate involvement of the coroner in investigating deaths. Sir Liam's report concludes that Northern Ireland is in line with international practice, but also concludes, and I quote from his report, that there is substantial room for improvement so that the coroner can more optimally contribute to the system's learning. We in the department have been working on a number of developments which we can discuss with the committee if you wish, and which we believe will contribute to such improvements. We do not, however, believe that the proposals put forward by the Attorney General will deliver any element of that improvement. In practice, we have concerns that it may have the opposite effect. A bit of context around health and social care in Northern Ireland, which some members will be more familiar with than others. Over 78,000 people are employed in commissioning and delivering health and social care in Northern Ireland. Each year, there are over 1.5 million hospital attendances, more than 7,000 treatments at accident and emergency departments, and around 500,000 inpatients or day case admissions occur each year. In addition, on a daily basis, over 100,000 patient clients receive a range of health and social care provision daily. And there are approximately 15,000 deaths in Northern Ireland each year, of which almost 7,000 occur in hospital. I'd like to say at the outset the Department expects all our health and social care organisations to provide information and documentation to any reasonable and adequately specified request that might help an individual or family to understand the facts and circumstances of any death. But we feel this must be done in a manner which avoids unnecessary bureaucratic burden. I want to continue by highlighting how we believe the system, as proposed by the Attorney-General, will operate in practice. Our analysis reflects what happens at present in response to requests from the Attorney-General for information on individual cases. Although any one of these requests will not bring an organisation to a standstill, the impact is felt throughout the Trust. The specific clinical aspects are usually concentrated on a small number of individual specialties and clinicians, but there are wider ramifications for and workload experienced by other executive, managerial and administrative staff. Firstly, in practice, frontline clinicians and other staff of necessity are required to review documentation and records in order to identify the material that is relevant to each request, and as a consequence are diverted away from providing services to patients and clients. I'm aware the Attorney-General's evidence to the committee that these requests will not place a burden on the health service is, in our view, and based on what is actually happening to date, open to question. His own evidence to the committee suggests that the powers to obtain information will not be used sparingly and, as a result, will significantly increase that burden further. Secondly, the open-ended nature of the proposed amendment will leave those receiving these requests unclear as to which records are relevant and which records are not. This, coupled with the knowledge that being liable to a legal sanction if they are subsequently judged to have withheld material considered relevant, places them in an invidious position. We are aware that trusts are already struggling to understand what information it is they are supposed to provide in response to existing requests. Thirdly, in order to ensure that they are complying lawfully with these requests, trusts are likely to take legal advice. Apart from the direct costs of that advice, trusts again will incur costs in terms of staff time, again including clinical staff, spending a proportion of their time consulting with legal advisors. Fourthly, issues will arise with regard to the impact that such requests will have on family members of the deceased. Who will have the responsibility of engaging with families? Will it be left to the Attorney-General, or will it fall to service personnel? Finally, as is happening at present, trusts will end up duplicating effort, providing information on the same cases separately and sometimes at the same time to both the Coroner and Attorney-General, as well as to other organisations that may have legitimate interests in deaths that occur in hospital. And I think it's worth pointing out that there are a range of bodies that have interests in deaths that occur in hospital settings, in addition to the Coroner and the police. We at the Department may have a legitimate interest, the Ombudsman, RQIA, individual patients and families will of course have, in certain instances the Health and Safety Executive, legal representatives acting on part of various judicial processes, including negligence cases and statutory inquiries, numerous professional regulatory bodies such as the GMC or the NMC, and auditors of various complexions, both internal to the organisation and the likes of the Northern Ireland Audit Office. So there are significant demands within our health and social care system to provide information quite legitimately and duly authorised in connection with deaths of patients and service users. This is in addition to any action that a trust may instigate itself in terms of investigating a death. In his evidence to the committee as part of the consideration of these proposals, the Attorney-General stated that there is a concern about deaths occurring in hospital context in particular that have not been referred to the Coroner. The evidence that we have at our disposal is that overwhelmingly deaths are reported appropriately in accordance with statutory requirements. We hope to be able to provide the committee with more data on this in the incoming weeks. We'll also be happy to discuss in general terms the position with regard to those cases in the Northern Trust which have been referred to in media coverage and in the Attorney-General's evidence. As members will be aware, under Section 7 of the Coroners Act 1959, it is a statutory requirement for doctors and others to report to the coroner a death and the facts and circumstances relating to it, if it resulted directly or indirectly from any cause other than natural illness or disease for which the deceased had been treated within 28 days of death, or in such circumstances as may require investigation. Not to do so is a criminal offence. The coroner can already ask for all of the information about a case, and the Attorney-General can both direct the coroner to conduct an inquest and can also ask for sight of whatever material the coroner has considered in deciding on whether or not to conduct an inquest. We are aware that the Attorney-General has used these powers to this end. We are also aware that in some cases the Attorney-General has directed the coroner to hold an inquest without seeking any further information, and in other cases he has directed an inquest before the coroner has concluded his own investigations. The proposed amendments enable the Attorney-General to engage in these requests without having to demonstrate any rationale, without anyone having oversight of his actions, and without being required to provide any clarity about what information he is seeking. The onus and burden is instead placed on the providers of the information. I think it would be useful at this juncture to clarify the background and purpose of serious adverse incident process. In order to be reported as a serious adverse incident, an incident must fall into one of a number of categories, one of which is the unexpected or unexplained death of a service user. Most serious adverse incidents do not involve death, but when they do, there is not always a direct relationship between the incident and the event. An example of that currently stands is that child death due to terminal illness is automatically reported as a serious adverse incident, even though there is no concern about the care and treatment provided. Whilst unfortunately deaths do occur in hospital, it is worth stressing that a hospital death does not automatically result in a serious adverse incident investigation. The process is not part of the coronial system or service and does not exist for that purpose. And it's unfortunate that in many people's understanding it is being confused with the death certification and coronial system. They are separate and the purposes of them are separate. This has a potential to undermine the operation of the serious adverse incident process as a learning system, which is its principal purpose, for the system to learn from investigation into these incidents. It operates to identify and promote learning. It is not a system that is based solely on records, but is heavily reliant on engagement with staff and others involved in providing care to determine their observations, evidence, viewpoints and insights into potential improvements. The scope and operation of the SII system has changed several times over the years, and again Sir Liam Donaldson in his report of yesterday has recommended further change. If it ceases to be an effective means of identifying learning, or better alternatives emerge in the future for identifying learning, then there is every possibility that the process would be stood down. Lastly, we have concerns about the practicality of the proposed clause that makes it an offence not to comply with the Attorney-General's requirement. There will be many people who have provided health and social care during someone's life. There is a lack of clarity regarding who the Attorney-General would actually give notice to, or indeed how he would know who had provided care in the first place. Who would he write to if someone died in hospital, for example? In summary and in conclusion, we have concerns about the policy rationale behind the proposed legislative change. The Attorney-General already has the power to direct an inquest when he considers it to be advisable, and it has not been established that there is a problem which the legislation will solve. The scope of the proposals lack clarity and would have serious implications, resulting in more frontline staff being directed away from providing essential care. Thank you for the opportunity of providing this evidence. Myself and my colleagues are happy to take questions from members that you might have.
Right. So to boil it down and briefly to say, it's your view that the power is unnecessary. The Attorney-General can carry out the functions that he needs in terms of directing an inquest under the current legislation. He doesn't need any additional stuff. And according to you, there's not really a problem here to be solved. Would that be a fair?
Yes, I think that summarises in a nutshell, Chair. Yes, that the current powers the Attorney possesses allows him to access the information, because essentially the coroner would access the information in any case, and a duplicate investigation. The concern would be that the bureaucratic burden that potentially could then be imparted on the health and social care system.
And you said in the vast majority of cases deaths are reported appropriately, and then you talked about the issues that were in the media, and are you saying that those were an anomaly, or there were particular issues why that issue arose, that they weren't reported correctly?
Well, The broad statistic is that almost a quarter of deaths in Northern Ireland are reported to the coroner as stands. Our background knowledge to the I'll turn to Fergal to give you the detail on the case in point in the Northern Trust.
Okay. Chair, could just, in our speaking note there at the start, just to clarify, I think Paddy said there were 7,000 attendances a day and there's 700,000, just to get that for the record. I think the Attorney-General in his evidence referred to some of the instances at the Northern Trust, and that dates back to events which happened in 2013. And the Trust itself reviewed a number of instances of SAIs that they had looked at over the previous 5 years. And I'm assuming in terms of some of the things that the Attorney-General is referring to, that it's those cases, there were 20 cases in total, of which around 11 involved death. Now, we're trying to avoid going into too much of the specific details of individual cases, but in looking at those cases, I would say that there were a number of the cases that were reported to the coroner at the time, and then there were several cases which either involved, for example, stillbirths, which at the time of death, under the legislation and in line with the rest of the UK, would never have been reported to the coroner. And then there's a couple of cases which only came to light up to a number of years after the event, where at the time of the death, there was nothing untoward, there was no one that would have caused the case to be referred to the coroner. But then a number of years later, as a consequence of a look-back exercise of looking at things like x-rays or tests, they became aware that something had been missed, and therefore that there was an issue with regard to the death. Now, what I would also say is that, we're looking at those cases, there would also be at least one case which you would logically have said you would have expected to be reported to the coroner at the time. So it's not true to say that there are never any concerns and there are no concerns. But overwhelmingly within that particular instance, what we have is either cases which were reported at the time, wouldn't have been required to be reported, or only came to light as a consequence of something else that happened a number of years after the death. And I think that's important because for the purposes of this, in contacting the coroner, you contacted the coroner on the basis of the information that's before you. Therefore, if the information only comes to your attention sometime later, which can happen, then that's the point when you contact the coroner. But even with that, overwhelmingly, most cases are reported to the coroner within a matter of a day, day and a half, 2 days, that sort of time period.
And I think the key point there is the source of making those cases, or making the coroner aware of those cases, emanated from the health and social care system.
And it was the trusts themselves that identified that they had an issue. They brought it to the department, and that's how it came to light. But it's not to say that we don't think that there are problems in terms of how the system works, and we do think that there are improvements, which is what we have been looking at outside of this particular amendment. Yeah. What we are, however, saying is that in terms of where the problems lie, this proposal doesn't actually address those problems. And I think I'd refer to one of the issues we have is, and it is highlighted in the Sir Liam Donaldson's report yesterday, there will be some deaths where it's blatantly obvious and very clear the case should be referred to the coroner. There will be some where equally it's very clear that there's no reason why it should be referred to. And then there's, in between those, there's a huge number of cases where basically it comes down to a matter of judgment as to whether or not it should be referred to the coroner, and that's part of where we're actually focusing on to actually try and improve the consistency of how those judgments are made. But we have no underlying concern that there's any cover-up or that there's any systematic avoidance of referring cases to the coroner. That's not to say that there will not be cases occasionally should have been referred to both. But what we're saying is that this sort of approach is not going to pick that up.
Okay, thank you. Alban?
Really, Chair, I think you've put it up very succinctly, and the witnesses have replied to confirm that that's essentially their view. But just one aspect of it is, under Section 14 of the Coroners Act 59, the Attorney-General can look at all the papers that the coroner's got and could, in fact, in such circumstances, ask for other papers, other documentation. Is that right? So he's got this overriding power to look at any single case and then say, by the way, having looked at all these papers, I think there should be an inquest. So that's his residual power in relation to any death that occurs, whether it's in hospital or elsewhere. Okay, I think that, I just wanted to confirm that.
Raymond?
Okay, thank you very much. And when you're reading out them statistics, Dr. Woods, I mean, I think we all appreciate the work that the health service. I had my father this morning at an appointment at McGavin Hospital, and the professionalism, healthcare is exemplary. So whatever we're talking about here is in that context. This amendment has been described, you know, loosely as a second pair of eyes, you know, and it's in that context. And when Fergal was speaking, you mentioned about, you know, the improvements within the system. We had the Health and Social Care Board up last week, and they talked about there was a particular report, the Ward report, which, you know, wasn't submitted to the coroner, and yet would have been of benefit to a family at a particular time. But even the framing of this amendment, there didn't seem to be any compulsion on that to be brought forward. Is that the type of improvement that you're looking towards for the future? That type of document should be submitted without this sort of idea of legally you might be covering that day?
To be clear, the particular issues around that, you would need to have people actually with relevant legal expertise to actually explain the basis. I understand that there are a number of different types of judicial processes and interactions between different parties where parties are not under any legal obligation. I couldn't explain to you the rationale for that. This amendment doesn't touch on that. What we have been looking at is, as I said, there are a wide range of cases where it is a matter of judgment. It's down to the individual person dealing with the case to say, in my judgment, this needs to go to the coroner, and they can only act on the basis of the information before them. What we have been looking at is around systems like, for example, of peer review. We have been piloting systems of, David Beale was talking about it, morbidity and mortality review systems, so that basically the idea is that rather than all these cases being left to individual judgment, after the initial death is reported or not reported, within a matter of a number of weeks, as part of a normal process within the hospital, the teams involved on a multidisciplinary basis would basically review the case and reconsider and just check that they're satisfied that it doesn't need to be reported as an SII, or it should have been reported as an SII and was, and would also basically look at, you know, the death certification to make sure that they're satisfied that what's been recorded on the death certificate, which is very important to us because we need clear evidence in terms of what people are dying from, that they're satisfied with the completion of the death certificate, and also that basically in terms of things like the coroner, that, you know, the individual judgment is subject to some sort of testing out against the views of others. And we believe that by moving towards that sort of a process, and it's only one of the things that we've been looking at, we will get a greater degree of consistency in terms of what is being referred, and it will act as a check in terms of the judgments of individuals, because we don't believe that this is down to where these things arrive, that it's down to people deliberately trying to conceal information. It is down to people exercising different judgments based on their interpretation of the evidence. And what you will find, and it has come up in the look-back exercises, where someone, you know, maybe tens of thousands of x-rays going back a number of years have been looked at, where another healthcare professional in reviewing what was previously looked at by someone else identifies something that they weren't aware of or missed. And that can happen. What we're saying is the sort of approach that was outlined in this amendment is not going to pick up on that. What we need is a more systematic approach to improve the quality of what we're doing and use the expertise of the people at the front line to actually try and ensure that the right decisions are made.
Should it be a case that if a case is referred to the coroner's court, then there should be full disclosure?
Well, as far as we're concerned, that the coroner should have access to all the information that he needs. But what I'm saying is, in terms of that particular legal issue, that's a level of expertise that we wouldn't possess. I'm not completely clear on the nuances as to why that actually happens.
No, I accept that, but neither am I, because, you know, I'm just reading. I don't want to say I'm across every detail, but there seems to be an acceptance. I mean, the coroner said that he felt he should have had the document.
What I would say with that, we tried to allude to this, when you actually put something on a statutory basis, and you're talking about, say, an amendment which would put people in peril of basically some sort of sanctions for not complying with that. What they're going to do is to take legal advice. And with respect, what will happen is that when you're taking legal advice, your legal advisors will tell you what you should do and what you don't need to do to comply with it, comply with the request. I don't believe you're going to find a situation where, in terms of dealing with those sort of things, that it will have been necessarily healthcare professionals who have said, let's not share that information.
No, I accept that.
They'll have acted on the basis of legal advice, and what we're moving into a situation here is increasingly of putting them in the position where they need to have someone with a law degree to tell them how to interpret what information they should be providing, not by virtue of saying let's hold something back, but the sheer volume sometimes of the information that can be held about any individual patient across multiple different locations and can be quite significant. And unlike with the SEI process, and bear in mind that SEI reports are pretty routinely now shared with families, those involved, or the patient if it's someone who's not deceased. For an awful lot of these cases, what you're talking about is reviewing the files of, basically have the hospital records. There's no X marks the spot where someone has done a nice little report, summarises all of the evidence and has gone through and analysed it in the way that an SEI report would. So, at the moment we're looking at about 1,000 SEIs, and I think a year, and I think about a third of them involve deaths, and quite a few of which will involve mandatory reporting around child deaths and mandatory reporting around suicides. So there's only a very, very small number of cases where you're going to have someone's gone in and actually done a piece of work focusing on the evidence and summarising it for you.
I think it's also important to remember that the SAI report is also then sent to the coroner. So they will have a disclosure of that. And when you mention full disclosure, it depends on what you actually mean by full disclosure in terms of, and I think the relevance of the information that is being requested is vitally important.
But I mean, I know it's perhaps an impossible question to answer, but that type of situation, in your opinion, wouldn't happen now? A report that was obviously material.
I couldn't absolutely guarantee that to you, but what I'm saying is that I need to have an understanding, which I don't have around the legal process, but this amendment isn't going to address that.
No, I accept that, but
it's a nuance.
But we would have an opportunity in the bill for a further amendment around. When you read this as a layperson, and it comes out the other end, you have someone saying that in terms of what happened in a hospital. The hospital commissions a report that supports the view of the family, but yet it doesn't seem to go to the coroner. There just seems to be something missing. Now, legally, nobody said anything improper, but in terms of assisting the family, and then subsequently comes out in an inquiry, and it looks as if
what I would say is that in the context of the SEI report, there are limited circumstances in which an SEI report is not shared. And those would include, for example, there are instances where the harm is suspected to have been caused or may have been caused by a family member. There will be other instances where you may be talking about the family member or individual that there may be health concerns, particularly about their well-being, implications for them of sharing information with them. But it is very narrow, and trusts are required to record why they don't share them. In terms of other documents, individual professionals, and Paddy we talked about this, are under specific responsibilities with regard to candour. It was announced yesterday we're moving towards introducing a statutory duty of candour with regard to organisations as well. I can't say to you it would never happen. What I can say to you is that it's extremely unlikely to happen in terms of the context of what way people would have treated this sort of information many years ago. But what I would also say to you is that unless the Attorney General is going to have significant resources and assistance to go in and trawl through information and records across quite a few cases, this is not going to pick that up. That's why, as I say, morbidity mortality review, we also have, and I'm going to ask Davy just to outline some of the work that's being done around independent review of deaths, and he'd be able to basically take you through that. Would you mind just saying a bit about that?
Yeah, we're considering proposals to bring before the Assembly in relation to introducing legislation to introduce a new medical examiner or medical reviewer system, based somewhat on the Scottish model, which is going to come into effect from the 13th of May this year, where a percentage of deaths will be randomly selected for scrutiny by the new Scottish medical examiner. There will also be another percentage of deaths that could be looked at in more detail, and I suppose that the prospect of what the Attorney General would like to introduce here, there is what's known as authorised persons who can actually request a further level of scrutiny by the medical examiner, and that is something that certainly we are considering in terms of bringing that in here to Northern Ireland, or considering the possibility of bringing it here to Northern Ireland.
In addition to being able to select cases randomly, what they do in Scotland, there's a provision there where if there's someone who is, I can't remember the right word, Davy will tell me, a legitimate person in terms of the case, they can actually ask the independent medical examiner to review their case if they've got a particular concern.
Interested party.
Interested party.
Yeah.
And in terms of, have you met the Attorney General in relation to this, or is it just been done through here, this
A lot of
process?
there's been a certain amount of correspondence backwards and forwards, and that's where we are. But I think I would hope the Attorney General is aware of a lot of that work. I'm not. He's certainly aware of the morbidity and mortality review system.
Thank you, Chair.
Patsy?
Yep, thanks very much, Chair. Just to gain a wee bit more understanding in this, paragraph 17 of your submission there, you refer to the fact that it's not entirely clear whether the rationale behind these proposed due to lack of information, and it would be important to have more policy clarity before legislation of this nature is introduced. What specifically around if you were to take a synopsis of what you require to be clarified?
I suppose if you turn it on its head, we're civil servants, we work on policy, we bring forward policy proposals for legislation. If I was to bring forward a proposal, and this would be the normal basis, to give anyone powers to access information or records about ordinary members of the public in any circumstance, I'd expect to be asked to actually articulate why that power is necessary, and why it's proportionate, and why that's the right person to have the power, and what the outcome of that would be. What we haven't actually seen something systematic like that, which actually says, first of all, that there's an issue in terms of non-reporting. Secondly, that this is a proportionate response, and thirdly, that this will actually have the impact or the outcome that you would desire, which we would share, which is that we want to be sure that the quality of information and the decision making in terms of referring things to the coroner is as sound and consistent as possible.
Yes, and then leading on to that, the next paragraph, that's around the scope, insofar as you believe it, or the perception is that it might have been broadened a bit. And the last sentence there, he would, of his amendments, accept the power to request any document or any other information from any person who provided health and social care to the deceased. I'm sort of slipping this back, and why shouldn't they?
Well,
in case something, sorry, I'll just maybe explain to my simple mind. That is that if, say for example, something happened external to a hospital that required that person to be in hospital, but it didn't become apparent to later, say in a post-mortem or something, that maybe they'd taken wrong medication or something like that, that it affected them wrongly, why shouldn't he have access to that information?
Well, if you're going to give someone the power, it's important that they specify who they can ask them information for. But does that definition, for example, include a family member who's a carer?
Yes.
Does it include the personnel records of all of the staff involved in providing the care to the individual? Does it involve, at some level, if the person has gone out and sought alternative therapy or alternative medicine treatment, does it involve going to the chiropodist? I mean, there's a significant burden here. How do you actually know who to ask for information of that might be relevant to the case? And that was sort of what we're trying to get to. We're not clear where this ends, and in terms of what the full extent of it is, and we just feel that there should be some clarity within that.
So, should that be very tightly specified there? Is that what you're saying?
What we're saying is that we're not clear how you would specify it,
How you would
to
specify
arrive
it.
at the
Okay,
purpose that you want, or that the Attorney General might want.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thanks for the presentation. From what you've said in reading your presentation, a lot of it is down to clarification. Would that be a fair suggestion that, you know, quite a bit of it is because you don't exactly know what the Attorney General may be looking for and what isn't provided currently?
No, it's more than that. We're not clear on the basis we're actually doing this, but we're also not clear that it's a proportionate response or what effect it's desired to have. In terms of what we've seen in terms of coverage, we're not the objective, and we share the objective, is to ensure that deaths are appropriately reported to the coroner. Now that's consistent, it's timely, etc. We don't actually see that this would have that sort of impact. When you're talking about 7,000 deaths a year, how many cases would the coroner look at, the Attorney General look at randomly or through any other process to actually hit on something? The point would be that it would be a bit like, I apologise for the language, buying a bit of a lottery ticket. What we're trying to look at is having systematic approaches which make sure that professional judgments are exercised appropriately, the process works systematically, and that there's some sort of checks and balances on it which means that basically, if an elderly person dies on their own in their home with no family members, that they have an equal chance of having the circumstances around their death investigated as anyone else, and that it's reasonable that the odds are better in terms of trying to drive up the quality, because ultimately, if you want to introduce a system where the 7,000 deaths a year in hospital are all scrutinised, there's simply resources and the implications for the whole system that couldn't be able to bear that. But it's trying to ensure that there's sufficient checks and balances there proportionately to actually make sure that the quality of what's being done is right and that the decision making is reasonably sound.
Well, my examples that I give, obviously what you're saying is a lot more on that. However, the issue around clarification is the key, surely, because you have said in your document here that the department principal has no objection to the AG having the power to access the information, but then you put in your caveats. So, sorry if I can finish, Fergus. The point I'm trying to make is, what you're saying is you've no difficulty if the Attorney General wants to get more information, but you're not sure what all that information is, why it's required, and why it's not being provided at the moment. And have you actually talked to the Attorney General on these issues? Because what I'm seeing is you saying, in principle, you have no objection, but under the current proposals, we don't support it.
Well, the Attorney General's approach has obviously been through bringing forward this amendment, but if I explain in terms of what our position is, we said we have no objection in principle, and we have no objection in principle, and I've actually been asked why not give the Attorney General the power. And my response to that, and this is my answer to your question, is that you could ask why not give someone else power to do something. The whole basis in which we actually normally bring forward legislation for us is to actually have a reason to give someone the power to do something. I mean, if we're changing, if we want, we wouldn't apply the threshold that there's no particular reason not to give someone the power, particularly when we're talking about a fairly wide-ranging power to actually go and access records of patients and clients. So what we're saying is that it's not that we don't object in principle, we're just waiting for someone to articulate to us why you should have the power, why it's proportionate, and whether or not, how and why they believe it.
But that's what I'm trying to say. Under the current proposals, because you're not clear, you don't support them.
Well, I think it's fair to say we're struggling to see the value this approach would add over,
I'm accepting that.
over what's already in place, and indeed other areas of work that we're progressing at this point.
You don't accept the second pair of eyes theory?
No, we're saying that there's multiple pairs of eyes. We're simply saying that if you're going to have a second pair of eyes, you're going to have systems in place to check. It has to be something which basically is capable of actually delivering the outcome you want. I mean, Davy, can I just ask Davy, what percentage of cases are going to be randomly selected in Scotland?
10% of the cases that would not be referred to the Procurator Fiscal, who would be the equivalent of our coroner. So taking that according to our figures for last year, there's about 15,000 deaths, 21%, 22% went to our coroner. So 10% of the difference, if there's any mathematicians here can work that out. 1,200. About 1,200, thank you, Phil. Would be what we would be looking at. But just to add to that, under the regional mortality and morbidity review system, which we're hoping to roll out across all the trusts, all deaths would be considered by multidisciplinary teams within the hospital. So there will be a number of additional sets of eyes who will look at the cause of death, will look at the care that is being provided, and that will provide a greater assurance than what is there currently. If we then went one step further to introduce the independent scrutiny, that adds the independence to it, apart from the peer scrutiny.
Chair, I think I'm there. I'm just trying to get a handle, which is quite difficult to draw out. That, you know, in principle, the department don't seem to have a difficulty, but there's a lot of clarification that they need. They're not sure. And it might be helpful if them and the Attorney General had a discussion around it, and it may actually clarify it, or it may make it even more confusing. I don't know, but I do take your points. I accept that. Yeah.
Patsy is a...
Sure, just one wee thing, you're the experts, and I just want to gain a wee bit of understanding. At what stage or at what point potentially could those powers interfere with the powers that the police have?
Well, the legislation would actually
Which powers are you talking about, Patsy?
Sorry,
These
say
powers?
Yes. Say, for example, if there was a perception or a view that potentially you're moving into a criminal investigation area that someone had wound up dead, basically, that shouldn't have, and that there was neglect or negligence or whatever it might be, and that you're moving into criminal area, and similarly, a police or a criminal investigation could potentially be going on at the same time as that. I'm just wondering, is there any potential there for, if you like, muddying the waters with almost too many been involved in it, whereas the Attorney General, the perception is normally that they're at arm's length back from it. I'm just thinking of the outworking.
Yeah, I guess as said in my opening remarks, there may be a multiplicity of bodies that have or authorities that have an interest in a death, and you've mentioned a few. We already have in place a memorandum of understanding between our department, the Health and Safety Executive, the PSNI, and I think the Coroner's Service as well, to address that very issue. So, yes, without knowing the details, yes, I dare say there is a potential, and within that, I think there would be a need to extend or look at this memorandum of understanding that we already have to ensure that the risk of that is minimised, or each party is clear as to their obligations and their role in those scenarios.
I think one of the things at the outset of the memorandum of understanding is to establish primacy of the investigation. Yes. So who takes charge of that investigation? I'm not sure that the attorneys, the practicalities of him knowing all the details at that stage would override any of the things that are already in place. I don't think that would be the case.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answers. I think it was very valuable, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll rattle through the rest of the agenda here and see if we can get through it in good time. Agenda item 7, if we refer to pages 164 of your packs, and then from 126 through 169 of your table pack for relevant papers. The purpose of the proposed statutory rule is to enable the introduction of the new career average revalued earning pension scheme for the PSNI and PSNI reserve. The Department of Justice officials attended the meeting back on the 14th of January to outline the proposed statutory rule and answer members' questions on a number of issues, including some raised during an informal meeting with serving police officers on the pension proposals. Following the briefing, the committee agreed to request further information from the Department and the Police Federation to assist consideration of the matter. The further information has been received, and the response from the Department is at pages 170 through to 178 of the meeting folder, and the response from the Police Federation is at pages 126 through to 169 of the tabled pack. The Department has outlined the consultation has taken place and clarified that any change to the retirement age would require primary legislation. The 2014 Act requires that all new public service pension schemes are implemented by the 31st of March 2015, with failure to do so running the risk of incurring a penalty estimated in the region of £60 million per annum from Treasury, and there would not be time to bring forward the necessary change. The response also highlights some other wider implications if the statute rule is not implemented by the 1st of April 2015. The Police Federation has outlined the consultation and engagement that it has undertaken in relation to the proposals. The Police Federation states that in the period between 2012 and 2014, there have been more than 40 meetings to discuss these matters, and that in November 2014 it submitted a 37-page response to the Department on the proposals. The Police Federation also provided copies of its magazine for September and December 2014, a copy of a presentation to the Police Federation Central Committee on Police Pension Reform, and copies of booklets it's provided to members on pensions. Further correspondence has been received from the police officers in relation to the pension issues, including a copy of communications with the Police Federation and a copy of the Police Federation update to officers on the police pensions. The correspondence is at pages 221 through to 235 of the meeting pack, and they've also requested the opportunity to formally brief the committee on their concerns. Now, given the time scale of progressing this issue and the fact that the committee has already met with the officers informally, and individual members of the committee have also received correspondence, I don't personally believe a formal briefing is required. We also have a little bit of a time restraint in this, so I'm going to ask if members are any more content than they were when they sought further information, given the response that we've had from the Police Federation. Alban, yeah.
Well, Chair, I'm not content, and I don't think although it was a very lengthy reply from the Police Federation, I don't think it said very much at the end of the day. The key issue here is the adjustment of the retirement age of PSNI officers. And as far as I can see, they didn't really address that in terms of their negotiations. Seem to accept a national plan in relation to pensions. Now, I might be wrong on that, but anyway, the point is there was no success. If it was an attempt to vary the age or to eliminate deductions from pensions for officers who retired between 55 and 60. That's the key issue as far as I see it. It would require primary legislation. The department's confirmed that. And the department now is putting a big gun to our heads and saying, if you don't do this before the end of March, we're going to lose 60 million. I don't believe that. But I think we owe our policemen, and I think that we should be saying to the department we would like to see primary legislation along the lines of the legislation that was specifically tailored to meet the concerns of the fire service here in Northern Ireland. I don't see any reason why we cannot do that, and I think that we are accepting, in the main, the pension scheme, but we're not accepting what we want to see in primary legislation is this adjustment. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I don't think that should incur a 60 million fine from Westminster. Now, I don't know how we do it, but if all of us as parties agreed that that was the objective, I can't see how it would be resisted within the Assembly.
I'm presuming the argument will be put forward, however, that there is a difference between the fire service and the police service in the sense that there is a greater opportunity for backroom jobs in the police service than there would be for the fire service.
To that extent, yes, there is. But I see the fire service as very important, and I think a very courageous people that serve the community. But I also see the policemen in a similar light, and I think that if we're going to do justice to the police, to our police officers, then I think we should be supportive of this change. It's not going to alter the whole scheme very dramatically, but at least it saves police officers who are coming towards the end of their careers, saves them, gives them an opportunity if they're going to retire with dignity and to retire without incurring penalties. And I think that that's an important thing. And I think we owe it to the police service to do that. And I think we as political parties, if we're agreed to this, maybe we're not agreed to it, but I would certainly suggest that parties should think about this very carefully. There must be some means of passing this legislation before, well, not necessarily before the 31st of March, but certainly before the end of this term, before the summer. It would not be an inordinate amount of drafting. I think it could be done quite simply, really, and I think if we have that objective in mind, we want to achieve that, then we can do it. It requires all party support. If there isn't all party support, then what I'm suggesting just falls by the wayside. I accept that, Chair.
I'd just like to come back to the general point, but the police officers at the informal meeting made the point that the provision for back officers' jobs now has been reduced greatly, because now every police officer is subject to frontline duty. So there was a wee, because we had raised that with, you know, the police, the fire service. And I just think that we should be asking the department, do they agree in principle that they should have the same exemption? Because there seems to be a miss. The police officers are very clear that they think the Federation should have been more aggressive on their behalf.
Yeah.
But if the department were at least saying, we agree in principle, then you might look at some mechanism for the future. Now, you have to maybe analyse the possibility of the threat of the fines, because you don't want to say they won't do it, and then you wake up on the 1st of April and they can do it, you know, we're left flat as well. So I just maybe want to explore that. Like, you know.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm totally sympathetic for the case put forward by the police officers. I do think there has been a failure here in some aspects, or at the very least a parting of ways somewhere along the line. But I do think there has been certain failures by the Federation, not being, for one reason or not being able to represent their officers ably enough and to bring their officers with them with regards to the negotiations, which has led to this hiatus. So I have every sympathy with their arguments. I do regard the professionalism and the expertise in the police force to be the highest of calibre and to be commended, and will always receive my support, as do the fire service. I take your point about the difference between the two organisations, and that's valid enough, and there's reasons there. My worry about all of this is that even if there was a will, and I don't believe that there is a will with regards to the Minister, how it would ever get through quick enough to ensure that we didn't get penalised in some way, which could well have a devastating effect on a budgetary line and the department, is something I'm really worried about at this point. I regret that it's come to this. I regret that this couldn't have been sorted out beforehand. But whilst I've a lot of sympathy and I've lobbied hard on behalf of the police officers who have contacted me, I fear now we're just too close to the knuckle on this, and I worry. But if we can some way pressurise the department and even the Federation, although they have responded, of course, into seeing and exploring the means and ways of legislation, yes, well, I'm all for exploration. I just don't see realistically how the timescale could be in place, whether the political will is there with regards to all the stages of legislation, and whether at the end of that process it would come out in the right guise to satisfy the needs and wishes of the police officers, which is all very much an up-in-the-air exercise and gamble at this point. And I would worry that, as Alban has suggested, that there is a certain pressure being applied here and a gun applied to the head. I would worry that the financial penalty would be too great at this late stage. So I'm very nervous about how we proceed.
I've met the group too, and I think, I have sympathy for them too. I think where the difficulty comes is that there may be an internal issue with the Police Federation, whether or not they believe they represented the views of the officers. But, well, that's the case or not, the Police Federation have entered into a national agreement on this. Right? That's where we're a little bit difficult. In terms of the timing, I think we are very tight, and of course the Minister could go ahead and lay the statutory rule anyhow, which I think we need to be cognizant of as well. If the committee is not content with it, we don't have to take a view on it, but I just think we need to be aware that the Minister may go ahead and lay the rule anyhow, and then it would be ultimately, did the Assembly decide? Stuart indicated, and then Tom.
I think, Chair, many people have just sort of summed up the issue here, particularly in relation to how this group of individuals feel that their staff association has dealt with the matter. It's a very difficult situation. I know that many trade unions suffer from those who feel that they haven't adequately represented all the arguments and all the views, or dealt with a particular niche area
but that the greater good for the number has been served in the settlement. And I think that's borne out by the fact that this is a national agreement and it has been signed up to by the other federations.
So
in
it's the
those
fire
terms.
service.
No, I understand. No, I understand that, but I mean, I think that given the time frame and all of that, then we have to probably proceed with this. If there are internal issues in the Police Federation and there is disquiet, then that opportunity is, it's a democratic organisation, and the opportunity is there for those who feel suitably, or if they feel disgruntled or otherwise, they can challenge for positions and representative roles themselves inside that organisation.
Sure.
That's
look,
democracy.
I'm sorry. I'm not concerned about the Police Federation.
No.
Whether, you know, the membership will judge what they've done, whether they've done it properly or not. And I don't really care that much about it. What I'm concerned about is there is an adjustment I think we can make to this pension scheme. We're accepting this pension scheme. Westminster should know that. The Treasury should know that. The Department should know that. But we want to adjust it. And that's all that we're suggesting. And there must be a legislative mechanism for doing that, for bringing a quick bill into the Assembly, and everybody says we're in favour of this, and you pass it. Now, I can't see any reason why we cannot do that, and there must be. It's not beyond the wit and wisdom of the advisors in this Assembly. And the people in the department to devise something, and the Department of Finance as well to devise something that meets the concerns of this committee in relation to police officers. We can give them all the sympathy that they deserve, but you know it doesn't butter their parsnips. You know.
Tom?
Chair, thanks. Just wondering, in light of what has been said. I don't know whether it's as simple as Alban makes out.
Maybe not.
It may be, and it may not.
Yeah.
But it might be useful to explore that. I don't know whether there can be an informal meeting with the department officials before next week even. If that would be possible. I'm assuming, though, because this primary legislation would have to be changed, probably DFP would have to be involved.
Yes.
The primary legislation, as I recall, went through DFP.
Yeah.
So it's likely to be there that the adjustments would have to be made, whether it's an amendment or new legislation. So I don't know whether all that's possible, Chair, but I would be reluctant to give it my full support at this stage without us having explored every opportunity.
What I suggest is we write to the department sensing the urgency of a reply on this issue around questions of whether in principle they agree with it, and secondly whether or not they believe it could be done in a time scale. The two specific questions. What the provisos have said, given the time scale is tight, the Minister may go ahead and lay the road, and then it's an issue for all of our
I think you should express in that, Chair, the view from here, which I think seems to be probably around the table, that we are concerned that the police officers are not getting a great deal out of it, or getting a poor deal. I don't know whether that's the general expression or not. That's what I felt I heard people say, that there is a lot of sympathy with them.
I'm confident the message will get back to the department in terms of the views around the table. I think my own view is we need to be very careful we don't end up in a situation where the department is penalised for not moving forward in something, because frankly, given the budget briefing we had earlier on, it can ill afford an additional 60 million coming out of it. So, look, we'll write to the department and we'll ask if we can get a quick reply to that and forward that to members. If that's agreeable. Okay. Move on to agenda item 8 then. Refer you to page 287 of your packs. Just to remind members, at the meeting on the 12th of November, the committee agreed that it was content with the draft guidance from the Attorney General for Northern Ireland on the Youth Justice Agency, which focuses on the conditions of detention. The committee also agreed at its meeting on the 10th of December that it was content for the draft guidance from the Attorney General for the Probation Board for Northern Ireland. Both sets of draft guidance were subsequently laid in the Assembly on the 15th of December. The Attorney General has now provided information on the proposed statutory rules that will bring the guidance into operation on the 1st of April 2015. Both rules will be subject to negative resolution. So are members happy enough to indicate they're content with that? Statutory rules, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, agenda item 9. referred to 295, your packs. The department has provided information on a proposed consultation and proposes to rationalise the court state, including the draft consultation document, and is seeking the views of the committee on its content. The paper outlines that as a result of budget reductions, the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service has to make difficult choices and will have to operate in a very different way. The paper sets out proposals to introduce a new configuration of court boundaries, which will divide Northern Ireland administratively into 3 administrative court divisions rather than the current 7 statutory divisions. It also proposes a reduction of the current court estate from 20 courthouses to 12, with the closure of Lisburn, Newtownards, Ballymena, Limavady, Armagh, Magherafelt, Strabane and Enniskillen courthouses. The department intends to publish the consultation paper in February 2015. The public consultation will last for 12 weeks, with a closing date in late April or early May. Following the close of the public consultation, officials will share the consultation responses with the committee and seek the committee's views on the way forward. Given the discussion that we had earlier, a number of members had raised this issue, and looking at the areas in which they're going to be affected and looking at the constituencies represented around the table, I suspect that members may wish to have an opportunity to talk to officials before the end of the consultation period. So if members are content, we will ask the department to provide us with a briefing on this issue, and it allows us to interrogate it a bit further.
Chair, I think due to the conversations with the Minister already by individual members, I think it would be fair to say, even at this stage, although we don't know the detail and everything else, I think it would be fair to say at this stage that we are deeply concerned as a committee with regards to the way forward, and that we will be all over this.
The courthouses? Or?
Yeah.
Yep. Your ones, go on.
Oh, aye, yeah. Although I've never... Gladly, I've never done it.
You're going to lose.
Glad I've never burned it. But I know you mean.
No use for it.
I know what you're saying.
So members content enough to ask for a briefing on that then, yeah?
As we take this forward, the fact that Declan Morgan this morning, it might be something in the future to invite him up to give it his perspective if he was to share it.
Yeah,
It's got a
be an idea.
bit to run, of course, but certainly I think we should put the marker down now.
I mean, the fact that the Chief Justice has made a public statement in relation to this is very, very serious, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's very reluctant to make any statements.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Look, we'll action that and try to get that fairly quickly. Agenda item 10 then, if you go to pages 368 of your folders, the department has provided a copy of the latest summary report from the Prison Review Oversight Group following its meeting on the 3rd of December 2014. The report states that 4 recommendations have been referred in this period for independent assessment, including a PRT 40, the Secure College, in which CJINI will monitor and report back to the Oversight Group. To date, 21 recommendations have been signed off by the Oversight Group and 16 have been referred for independent assessment. The Oversight Group is due to hold its final meeting in the spring of 2015. So are we content to note the report from the Prison Review Oversight Group? Yep. Does anybody wish any further?
Perhaps maybe after their last meeting, maybe we could invite them to the committee just as a wrap-up.
Sure.
Like, I mean, okay.
Happy enough for that, that's fine, yep. Okay then, members, agenda item 11 is correspondence. There are 8 items of correspondence, pages 377 to 413 in the meeting folder, and 1 item at page 177 to 206 of the tabled pack. Item 3 at page 381 is a response from the department in relation to PSNI funding applications to Horizon 2020 and the European Commission Annual Work Programme. The department provided a summary of PSNI applications to Horizon 2020 and advised the committee of the publication of the Annual Work Programme of the Commission 2015. Committee staff will liaise with the DFM Committee and the Assembly's Research and Information Service in relation to the European Commission's Annual Work Programme, and a paper to assist consideration of the Committee's EU priorities for 2015 will be prepared. Item 4 at page 399 is an invitation from the Committee for the Office of First and Deputy First Minister to a seminar on Building United Community Shared Space Design and Delivery on Monday the 9th of February at 12:30 in the Long Gallery. If anybody wishes to go to that, can you just let the clerk know? Item 8, page 412, is an invitation to a conference at Queen's University on the 10th of February on raising the minimum age of criminal responsibility. I had indicated I will try to get along to it if I can. If anybody else wishes to go, can they please indicate to the clerk? Item 1 at page 171 of the table pack, the Criminal Justice Inspection Report on police use of discretion in water disposals, which was published earlier on today. Just ask members to note the report unless anyone wishes any further information. I had a brief look through it this morning. It might be an area we would do a wee bit of research on in terms of the use of youth discretionary disposals, reoffending rates and all that kind of stuff. So if members are happy, I might ask if we do a little bit of research on this, because it's something which may be useful for the future, particularly given the NIACRO proposals about the wiping the slate clean and stuff, so it might be useful around that. Any other issues with any other items of correspondence? Happy enough? Okay. Agenda item 12, no chairman's business. Unless any other business? Good.
Chair, I'm just going to, I met some people recently from the Belfast Law Centre, because I did some work with them, and they offered that if we wanted to come out at some stage to have a meeting there, and they'll provide lunch in that for us. So maybe the
provide lunch
program.
We're in there.
Don't send the menu. Send the menu.
That's okay. No doubt we'll say about that in the future. Okay, members. Then the next meeting, 4th of February, in this room, at 2 p.m.
Committee room 21.